Well, good evening, everybody. Good evening, and I'd like to call to order this Planning Committee meeting of the Council of the Town of Saugeen Shores. Really want to welcome you all to the Council chambers this evening. It's great to have a full house, and it's good to see you all this evening. We have no additions, deletions, or amendments to the agenda. So item 3 is disclosure of pecuniary interest and nature thereof. So I'll ask any member if they have a pecuniary interest in anything they would like to declare at this time. Seeing none, of course, you can declare one anytime if you need to. Next is adoption of minutes, and I have a motion, and it is moved by Councillor Grace, seconded by Councillor Smith, that the Planning Committee minutes dated January 21, 2019 are hereby approved as circulated. Are there any questions or comments to that set of minutes? Seeing none, all in favor? That's carried. So that moves us on then to our public meetings. Item 5, we have 2 public meetings on the agenda this evening. I'll just take us through the procedure for the public meetings just so everyone's on the same page to get started. Of course, these are public meetings, so council doesn't make decisions on these items at this stage. The purpose of the public meeting is for us to hear the details of the proposal and then primarily to hear from you folks about your thoughts with regard to those proposals. So there will be no decisions. The planner will take the input from tonight away and they will come back to us at a later date with recommendations. So what we will do, the way we'll proceed is that first we will, with each public meeting, we'll hear from the planner. The planner will tell us about the application, and then I will open up the floor to members of the public who want to speak to us on the application. I'll ask you to come up to the podium here if you'd like to speak, and I'd ask you to state your name for the record. I anticipate we have quite a few people who want to speak to these applications, so if you could keep your comments succinct and also try not to repeat the same points over and over again, I'd appreciate it, but we are keen to hear from anybody who wants to speak. So we'll do that. And then after we've heard from the public, members of council will then have an opportunity to ask questions of clarification to the planner or the applicant. So that's the whole process. That's enough from me. So I'll turn it over now for our first public meeting, 5.1. It's a public meeting on an application from 1984601 Ontario Incorporated, care of Randy Von Haking, Georgian Huron Developments, and I'll turn it over to Tessa for the report. Tessa.
Thank you. So this is an application for a plan of subdivision and rezoning. And just to give a brief overview of the process here, Bruce County is the approval authority for plans of subdivision, and the county has delegated the mandatory meeting required by the Planning Act to the town of Saugeen Shores, so that's what we're here for today, in order to obtain municipal and public comments on the proposed development. Now, the town of Saugeen Shores is the approval authority for amendments to the Saugeen Shores zoning bylaw, so these 2 applications here have 2 different approval authorities, but this is the kind of first public meeting for both. So the goal today is to provide an overview of the application and then to listen to all the comments and then come back at a later date with a recommendation to the committee. So the application we have today is for a draft plan of subdivision. I've got the site context up there. So as you can see, it's a vacant lot currently. It's a field zoned environmental protection, EP, and planned development. So this is in Southampton. So it's right at the intersections of Granville Street here and Spence Street. And this is the property here. So we've got the Helliwell Park soccer fields just to the north, just to kind of locate everyone. So it's an approximately 1.5 hectare sized parcel, and it's intended to be fully serviced with municipal water and sewer. 2 blocks are proposed for stormwater management, and then the general application for the draft plan of subdivision includes 15 lots for single detached dwellings, and those are intended to be along Spence Street. And then a block on the draft plan, which is proposed to be a condominium block, which will include townhouses and apartments. So that's kind of the interior of the lot, and that'll be serviced with an interior private road. So the single detached are proposed to front onto the municipal road, Spence Street, and then an internal road for the condo for access to the townhomes and the apartment. And then 2 blocks are proposed for stormwater management on the parcel in this general area. So there's a number of supporting studies that were provided with the application. I've given an outline of those in the report. Just in terms of surrounding land uses, there's some residential lots just adjacent to the property. There's an institutional use, Southampton care home, adjacent to the property, as well as open space, the municipal park. As mentioned, it is within the settlement area, able to be serviced with municipal water and sewer, and taking access from this side on Grenville Street and from Spence Street. So I've gone over already kind of what's proposed in terms of the development. This is the draft plan here. So we've got the single detached along Spence Street, and then Block 18, which would be the townhome and apartment block, the 2 stormwater management blocks proposed here at this end of the site, and you can see the internal road that's proposed to take access to the condominium section. So this would be what would be proposed through the draft plan approval process, and then just to give more detail on what is being proposed for the condominium, this is the configuration for Block 18. So we've got a number of townhomes along in here, and then an apartment building at this end of the site here. So just to give kind of a sense of what's being proposed for detached dwellings, they would all have a frontage of about 15 meters or more. Some of the ones close to the road, I think these are a little bit more than 15. There's 15 of them proposed, so that's about just over 21% of the overall unit numbers and proposed to be freehold. And so it's about 0.7 hectares of the site proposed for detached dwellings. For the townhomes, they would all have on the proposed concept plan, they all have about a 10-meter frontage. About 30 units proposed as condominium, and that's combined with the apartment, this area is about 1.6 hectares. And for the apartment, it's proposed to have 24 units, which is about 34% of the units for the development, again, as part of that same condominium. And again, this is 1.6 hectares. So we're looking at a total of 69 units currently proposed. And this represents an overall density of just under 30 units per hectare. So in terms of the zoning, the single detached are proposed to be zoned R2, and there's no kind of special provisions required there. It would just be R2 as it currently is in the zoning bylaw. The Block 18 is proposed to be rezoned to R3X, and the X is just a kind of holding there. A number will be assigned when we get closer, should it proceed. And the special provisions proposed in the R3 zone have to do with a reduced rear yard down a little bit from the 7.5 meters, and as well as basically stating what the general setbacks should be to reflect the zoning bylaw. Currently, all of our setbacks in terms of roads and setbacks from municipal roads are based on municipal roads and not from a private road. So there would be some provisions to say, okay, this should any setback should match what's required off of municipal streets. So it matches on the private internal road here. Special provisions are also required just to clarify the number of units in the proposed development of townhomes versus apartments. And the stormwater management pond are just EP. In conversations with the SPCA, we believe it would be an EPX zone, just to clarify the use as a stormwater management facility, just to make sure that's clear in that EP area. So just in terms of the policies, I'm just going to give a brief overview. So the highest level of policy we have to contend with is a provincial policy statement. And all decisions that the town of Saugeen Shores takes shall be consistent with matters of provincial interest as set out in the provincial policy statement when it comes to Planning Act applications. There's a number of relevant policies that I've identified, and I'm happy to provide more information on those. I don't want to go through all of it here. But basically, the PPS encourages that development should happen adjacent to existing development. It should include a range of housing types and densities. That there should be sufficient capacity for servicing, sufficient access, that there will be no impact on significant cultural or natural heritage features, and that sort of thing. So that's generally what the PPS is looking for, is efficient use of land, efficient use of services, and appropriate development in the right locations where it can be serviced and is consistent with kind of the settlement area. In terms of the official plan, so for the Bruce County official plan, this is within the primary urban community of Saugeen Shores. And these areas are identified to accommodate the majority of growth and development on full municipal services. The county plan sets out some policies in terms of encouraging affordable housing and minimum densities. So the county plan encourages local plans to require a minimum of 30% of all new residential development to occur in the form of medium and high density. In this case, it's about 78% medium density, this proposal. There's also a number of policies in terms of the approval of subdivisions and condominiums. And this has to do with servicing. So one is that if it's serviced by full municipal sewer, it should have a minimum density target of 15 dwelling units per gross developable hectare, unless otherwise approved, and this exceeds that. As it has about just on average just under 29 units per gross hectare. In terms of the local official plan, it is designated, the majority of the lands are designated, I'll bring it over here, residential. So that's this yellow here in the local official plan, the Saugeen Shores official plan, and the green is natural environment. Now, through the engineering studies that have been submitted with this application and reviewed by the SVCA, there's proposals to make some changes to that natural heritage designation to reflect the actual hazards on the site, and what will result in the engineering as a result of this proposal. And the official plan recognizes that the AH designation boundaries are flexible to a certain degree and may be subject to revision based on updated information. And so the proposed stormwater engineering ponds are proposed to have that updated hazard delineation, but through consultation with the town and the Conservation Authority, it seems that the EH designation, the hazards will be contained to just those stormwater management areas, and none of the proposed residential would be located in a hazard area. Gone through the density requirements. Those are also outlined in the town of Saugeen Shores official plan, targeting 30% of new housing to be provided in the form of medium and high density development. The Town of Saugeen Shores official plan also establishes criteria for the review of new medium density development, and I've included that criteria in the report, as well as the considerations which council must be satisfied for plans of subdivision. So these are all criteria for your review, and I'll provide a thorough planning analysis of those criteria at a later date. In terms of the zoning, I've kind of gone over what's being proposed. Again, the detached dwellings are proposed to be residential second density, no special provisions proposed there. The town apartment block proposed to be rezoned residential third density, and the stormwater management blocks to be rezoned environmental protection. And I've gone into a bit more detail in the report about the special provisions, and I'm happy to answer questions about those. But I think I've kind of covered it for the purposes of this meeting. In terms of public comments, there are no comments received yet at the time of writing this report from the town of Saugeen Shores, but I understand they're doing their review of the application at a staff level. In terms of, there were some conditions received from utility providers. Union Gas provided some draft conditions, as well as the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority, but they had no major issues with the proposal. It was found to be generally acceptable, subject to the conditions of draft approval. And when I come back with a recommendation, it'll include a full list of those conditions of draft approval as our standard with a draft plan of subdivision. So for the most part, everything that's provided, that's been provided so far as proposed conditions are what we would typically see in a draft plan of subdivision. In terms of public comments, we did receive comments from two adjacent property owners. One had to do with reconfiguring the internal roadway off of Grenville Street. That's been looked at by the applicants, but it would require looking pretty closely at their engineering for those two stormwater management blocks. So I haven't heard back in terms of the if they're able to do that at this time, but it has been brought to them for proposal. Those same neighbors also asked about allowing access onto the private road from their property. My understanding is this would be something that they would have to work out with the condo corporation who would own the road privately. It's not something we as the planning department would get involved in, but likely for liability reasons, it wouldn't be something that we would see having an external owner, an external person using that private road just for their own liability purposes. Other issues that were raised had to do with stormwater management. It is a quite wet area currently, and I believe the engineer for the development is here, or the town's engineer can speak a little bit more to stormwater management than I can from a technical standpoint, but my understanding is that the engineering has been done and it can be appropriately managed. There are also some concerns in terms of servicing, and so there have been a few different servicing options outlined through the report, and again I'm waiting on town comments from town staff to confirm that there's no major issues with the servicing as proposed. And then just general questions about the suitability of the development, and those full comments have been provided to the committee for their review, and a more thorough review will also be provided of all the public comments that we've received at a later date. So that's basically just to outline the application so everyone's kind of aware of what's been received and what's being proposed. So there's no recommendation being made at this time, and with that I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Tessa. I guess I'll just ask the applicant, do you have any comments that you'd like to make to the committee at this time?
Yes, good evening. My name is Ron Davidson. I am a planning consultant, and I'm here tonight on behalf of the owners. Both Randy and Brett are here tonight. And beside them, closest to me, is John Slocum. John Slocum is an engineer, senior engineer with GM Blue Plan. He'll be happy to answer any questions you have regarding servicing or stormwater management. I guess I just volunteered him. So prior to the application being submitted to the county and the town, we did a fair amount of pre-consultation with the town, with the conservation authority, and of course with the county planning department as well. And we did exactly what was required in terms of submitting preparing and submitting the necessary background reports. And Tessa has gone over what those reports were. I'm not going to say too much. Anything I would say for the most part would have been reflected in what Tessa has already said. I would just, in a nutshell though, the official plan designates this area mostly as residential with some hazard on the side. So your official plan identifies this as an area for development. The residential designation encourages, doesn't only suggest, but requires a mix of housing types and densities. So there's a good mix in here as well. As Tessa indicated, we are above the minimum requirement of the official plan for detached dwellings. For dwellings, and we're below the maximum permitted in the town's official plan. In a nutshell, our proposal is very much in keeping with what the town official plan is asking for new development to look like in Port Elgin and Southampton. And again, it's also encouraged and supported very much so by the provincial policy statement, as Tessa has gone into. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So now I'll ask if there are members of the public who would like to speak to this application. If you'd come to the, you can come on up and come to the microphone, and there's a blue button there. Make sure to hit that, and don't forget to give us your name for the record.
Hi, my name is April Naidley. I live at 414 Spence Street. That's been my home since 1977. I come here tonight because I was looking for some answers and some dialogue, but I see it'll more be, I won't get that tonight, I'll have to wait. I'm speaking on behalf of myself and some of the other residents in the neighborhood. We are opposed to this development on the grounds of, we're concerned about the impacts on the community, on our properties, and on the environment. It is true that the area is zoned as residential. It's zoned as residential 1, level 1, and environmental protection zone or environmental hazard zone. The developer is proposing to have that changed to residential 2 and residential 3, which is the highest density, or one of the highest densities, and it's not in keeping with the rest of the neighborhood. The rest of the neighborhood is single detached homes, variable yard size, variable house styles. What the developer is proposing are townhouses, which by their very nature are uniform and repetitive. Apartment buildings are not at all in keeping with the character of the neighborhood because there are none. Furthermore, the homes that are proposed, all the lot sizes are very, very similar. So you can imagine what kind of a house can go on similar small lots. Not again in keeping with the character of the neighborhood. People come to Southampton and Port Elgin to escape from the Golden Horseshoe, which has been paved over suburbs, developments. They come here for that very character that we have of a smaller town, individuality, friendliness, uniqueness. This development proposes to start to turn Southampton into what we see in Brampton, Mississauga, Kitchener, Waterloo. It's destroying the very uniqueness of our community. And this proposal is just one of many. They're happening all over. You'll hear another one down by the lake shore where that's being proposed. So this, even though this is supported by the provincial government, does not mean we have to let development run rampant through our community. We can do it in a measured and more appropriate manner. I know that this lot is zoned for residential, and that would be fine. Not residential 3, residential 1. The density of this proposed development is a big issue. And part of the reason why we're opposed to the density is because it impacts the quality of life. The noise, the lights, the dog feces, the garbage, all of that is not in keeping with the neighborhood. The neighborhood, if you noticed, is surrounded by farm fields, not even farm fields, just fallow fields on two sides, a forest on the other, and a few houses to that join with the rest of the neighborhood. So that's not in keeping with what's going on in the community. For my property and my neighbor's properties, we have a lot of concerns about this. It wasn't shown on the maps, but our properties and a good portion of the proposed development area is zoned as environmental hazard or environmental protection zone. And the reason for that is because there's a high groundwater level. It's very soggy, very wet, prone to flooding when it rains, after the snows, and it gets ponding. So when you look out my window at the proposed development site, many times it looks like a lake. Honest, a lake. There's no, you don't see things. It's just pure water almost all the way to the border. Okay? So what they will have to do is build that land up because the houses will be wet. The water already flows from the far side where the development is proposed, all the way down to our properties, right? And so when you raise that land up, what is that going to do? All the water is going to drain down to our properties. I already am struggling with water in my basement. I have a sump pump. It runs all year round from, I think it's October to the springtime. It runs every 90 seconds to 4 minutes, right? In the summer, it continues to run throughout the year. Now, I've taken measurements. I've spent a lot of time trying to waterproof my basement. But if you start adding all the drainage from the other development, I'm not going to be able to keep the water out of my home. When I asked the conservation area in the town, can I maybe tear down my house so I don't have a basement and build a new one? They said it wasn't zoned that way and I wasn't allowed. I could tear it down, but I may or may not be able to rebuild it. I'm like, okay, well, what about if I just did some waterproofing measurements around the outside? Well, you can't change the drainage pattern in an environmental protection zone. All I wanted was to stop the water from draining into my house. But with this proposal, all of a sudden, he's gone through all the right channels, and now he can put houses, roads, ponds, everything on there. And I wasn't even able to waterproof my basement, partially because I couldn't pay the fees for maybe getting a response. So with the stormwater management, the proposal says there are going to be these stormwater ponds, and all the water is going to drain towards those ponds, which happen to be beside my house. So we'll have these ponds of standing water, because he says they're dry, except nothing in the area is dry. If you look at my driveway right now, I have this much water in it. If you look at my backyard, it's covered in moss and spongy. So these aren't going to be dry stormwater ponds. They're going to be filled with water. Now, if they're going to be concrete, then the water is just going to sit there and become all sludgy pond scum. If the ponds are gravel, well, all the water is going to seep out, and where is it going to go? It's going to go into our houses because we're lower than the rest of the area, right? So that's not acceptable. Then there's going to be swales, which are like grassy mounds that direct the water in a desired zone. This proposal doesn't tell me where the swales are heading. Is it stopping the water from draining to my house, or is it putting the water into my house? There is some indication that it'll be draining into Grenville Street. They said a 10-centimeter pipe, okay, 10 centimeters for, what is that, hectares of land draining. I have a culvert at the end of my driveway this big. Right now, it's 50% full. After a big rain or snow, it's 75% full. I don't understand how a 10-inch pipe or 10-centimeter pipe is going to drain the entire area. With the ponds, the other thing I have a problem with is the standing water, right? When there's standing water, that breeds mosquitoes. Mosquitoes, West Nile virus. And even if they're not going to give me West Nile virus, I can't sit in my backyard when there's standing water. Why should the quality of my life be sacrificed for a development? The other problem we were having, and we're concerned about, is the sewage. There's two proposals for the sewage, and let me just see what they say. Neither of them are adequate. Sewage. One of them says that there's actually not enough capacity to get rid of the sewage because they've just recently expanded the Southampton Care Centre. It's now going to have 200 beds in it. So that's going to take up a lot of the pipe to get rid of the sewage. In fact, one of the documents said that there'll be 4.9 liters of sewage excess per minute. Where is that going to go if that capacity is used up by other developments? Then the other proposal to get rid of the sewage is they said, we're going to connect to the Anglasia sewage pumping system. That hasn't even been built. So I'm not understanding where the sewage is going to go in that time. Similarly, water servicing. Presently, the water coming to my house isn't quite adequate. If I flush the toilet after I wash my hands, there's no water. If I take a shower and someone turns the water on in the kitchen, I have no water. The pipe going to Southampton or to Spence Street is 150 millimeters. The minimum requirement is 200 millimeters. So is the developer just going to connect an already too small pipe to the rest of the development? So that needs to be clarified, the water coming in and the water going out before this proposal can be accepted. The other point that we were worried about was the environmental protection zone. On the map, it goes into a good part of the proposed development and covers my property. So, how can that change? There's a layer of clay under the area, and that's what's preventing the water from draining, and that's why it's so prone to ponding and flooding, this layer of clay. How is that going to change when you have the same amount of rain, the same amount of snow, and in fact when you cover the other area with houses and concrete and roads, there's no plants, there's no soil to absorb that moisture. So that's going to drain into the environmental protection zone, which is no longer going to exist because the proposal is we're just going to move the boundaries. And yes, I understand that EPA boundaries can be flexible, but not to that degree that all of a sudden it ends straight with the road. Halliwell Park, which is right beside, there's my house, there's the proposed development, and Halliwell Park. That one is also part of an EPA, and they built on that. That soccer field is wet most of the year because it is part of the environmental protection zone. It's not really usable. It's soggy. Residents have complained. Building there was not advisable, and now they want to build houses in the same kind of zone. The other thing that people have expressed concern about is the natural heritage. This area does not have protected and rare species, but what it does have is it's a natural area. It's where people go to walk with their kids. They see butterflies flying from flower to flower. There are deer in the morning mists. There's raccoons. There's lots of just common wildlife, but it's a natural area. And that's, again, one of the reasons why people come to Southampton, because you can go for a walk and be in fields and hear the birds. And that is something that we're afraid is going to be lost. So what we propose is that we understand there has to be development, but we would like that the development the density not be changed to the highest amount. And they say it's within the amount. So they sort of recommend 30%. This is at 78%. So it's below the maximum, but it's way far away from the minimum in terms of density. So you can zone it as residential, just keep it as it was. We also ask that you keep the environmental protection zone as it is and build a buffer zone. In good urban planning, there's often a buffer zone around environmental protection zones because they're special. So we would ask for a buffer zone, keeping the density. We would like to see trees and shrubs and native plants planted in the protection zone and along the buffer zone because that will help slow down the water and absorb the water. The trees will stop light and noise. And similarly, if a berm was there, a rise of land, that helps block out noise. And we wanted to see a drainage system from the subdivision to go around the EPA in our properties. That way the water is not added to the load that we already have. And so that was our concerns. I've submitted a letter of objection thoroughly detailing all of this, and it would be nice if I did receive notification on how our concerns are going to be addressed before the proposal is accepted. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Are there other comments to this application from members of the public? Ask. Okay. Thank you. Are there other questions? Any other member of the, I'll ask one more time, if there's any other member of the public who'd like to have anything to say with regard to this application. I don't see any, so I'll ask, are there members of the committee with questions for clarification directed to the planner? Councillor Grayson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess my first question would be for the applicants regarding the zoning that you're asking for the lots 1 to 15. You're asking for R2, but your intention is to build single-family dwellings. Why are you asking for R2?
No, yeah, please go to the podium so everyone can hear you.
Yes, the R1 and the R2 zones both permit detached dwellings. The R2 zone is designed to permit a slightly smaller lot area and lot frontage. And just to clarify, the lands are not zoned R1 now. I don't know whoever has control of the switch wants to take us back. It's zoned PD. There is a little bit in the northwest corner that's zoned R1. But the lands are zoned PD, so there's no zone now. There's no density now, if to use that term. The PD zone does not permit anything. It's a holding zone of sort, a wait-and-see approach, and that's why it needs to be changed. So there's no R1 zoning now. There's nothing that says that these lands are going to be used for single-family purposes.
Councillor Grace,
some other questions. So just to clarify, though, if it was R2 zoning, the developer would be allowed to build semi-detached or duplexes in those lots.
No,
is that correct?
they wouldn't fit.
Okay.
Yeah. Once the lots are created, the lots will be so meters wide. The only thing that will fit onto those lots at that size will be a single-family dwelling.
Okay. I have some other questions on the stormwater issue and drainage. So this is an issue that Ms. Niedley brought up, and that's about how the engineering of the stormwater ponds would change the boundaries of the environmental hazard lands, which are quite extensive. How would those boundaries be readjusted to be just within those 2 blocks?
Sure. Mr. Mayor, can we have the engineer stand up and answer that question?
Yep, anybody who can answer the question, by all means.
Mr. Mayor, I guess if I could answer in a bit of a broad sense, the EP zone was, as I understand, established back in the day based on a study that was done by a company called the Latham Group. They did a study for all of Southampton that looked at the flood drainage systems throughout the town at a fairly broad level, broad scale. And their study ended just, I'm going to call it east of Grenville Street, assuming that Grenville runs north-south, just outside of our property limit, basically. So that was done probably late 80s. They finished the report, I think, about 1990 or so. Subsequent to that, the town built a trunk storm sewer on Grenville Street, north to outlet at Ferry Lake. So they've improved the drainage system, the capacity available for drainage in that area, subsequent to the study that was done that created the EP zone. So as part of the work that we have been assisting the developer with, we do a site-specific level of study, it's called, where we do a topographic survey and more detailed analysis specific to the area, and determine that with the capacities available in the piped system, the flows that are considered and calculated through that area, that the flood extent which caused the EP zone to be created in the first place wasn't as significant as was mapped, as shown here. So that permitted us to look at on-site stormwater management features, and basically the EP zone, which is considered appropriate for this development, is restricted to the stormwater management ponds, which would receive drainage internal to this development through a system of storm sewers and surface swales into the stormwater management ponds on site, which would then discharge into the trunk storm sewer, which was built by the town on Grenville to take that water away from existing development and downstream to the existing development to the outlet. I hope that helps.
Don't forget to turn your mic back on there.
This is referring to the document, I think it was the stormwater management document that had a number of comments from the SVCA in terms of emails. Okay. So one of them talks about requirements that the SVCA would like to see. I believe Tessa also referred to this in terms of subdivision agreements. So the SVCA staff doesn't recommend in-ground basements in the area and recommends that surface drainage routes be maintained by the development of the site. Is that something that the developer is planning to follow, those recommendations?
We just get that answer into the microphone. I suspect there's lots of people who can't hear.
Sure.
Sorry.
Yeah, the development is proposed to be constructed as slab on grade, so there's no basements proposed in any of the structures.
Okay. And in another, this is an email from an SVCA staff member, Candace Ham, to Oliver Dutre, who I believe is representing in some capacity, the stormwater or the engineers. Mr. Dutre said to the SVCA, "We need to have this floodline issue resolved so the developer may proceed with a conceptual design for the lands." Could you explain what the floodline issue is?
Yeah, so based on pre-consultation, it was determined that that was basically the engineering that did that. So as mentioned, the previous study, the Lantham study, just went up to about here, and this flood line was somewhat inferred, is my understanding, from those calculations, and then there was subsequent infrastructure improvements that were done with that Grenville trunk sewer that, again, changed the drainage patterns in the area and provided more capacity. So, the SVCA just didn't have that information, and earlier conversations between the developer and the SVCA that we were involved with in those pre-consultations were kind of looking at this is their understanding of where the flooding is and what it resulted is, but as you can see, this is a pretty straight line here, and it wasn't accurate and wasn't accurate to the site conditions, and the stormwater management plan submitted through the application kind of demonstrated that to the satisfaction of the SVCA, that yes, this flood line is not accurate, and that was what needed to be resolved, was getting that updated information.
If I can continue. My next question is going to be referring to the Hurricane Hazel flood event standard. And before I ask the question, I wanted to if I could relate something that I learned as an SVCA, Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority rep. We were told in a meeting by Eric Downing, who is the environmental planning and regulations manager for this SVCA. And he related, it was helpful to me because this term Hurricane Hazel flood event standard is thrown around a lot and governs a lot of our environmental regulations. But what he related is that a recent flood event down near Carlsruhe had a flow of 1,800 cubic feet per second. In contrast, the Hurricane Hazel flood amount was over 14,000 cubic feet per second. So that's just, for the edification of the public and also our committee members when we're talking about Hurricane Hazel flood event standards in an already wet area. That's a concern. And it's apparently a concern with the SVCA because the SVCA also asked the authors of the stormwater report You have noted the following, I'm quoting, that eventually Spence Street from Anglesea to Grenville will be urbanized with curb and gutter, etc., that the culvert at Spence Anglesea and the intersection grade should be maintained to preserve the potential spill conditions at the intersection, as well as the potential ponding conditions during a Hurricane Hazel flood event standard event, and that detailed modeling should be done as well to account for the Hurricane Hazel flood event standard flows. While this rationale is acceptable to SVCA staff, it remains unclear to SVCA staff as to whom will bear the responsibility of ensuring these conditions will be preserved and that the studies will be completed. In this email exchange, the developer answers that the town of Saugeen Shores will be responsible for ensuring that all of these conditions will be preserved and the studies will be completed. And I wanted to ask our Director of Public Works, if Amanda, could you comment? Is that something we're prepared to do?
Yes, and through the statement that they're making is that through the draft plan conditions of the subdivision, we will put that on the developer, and then we're responsible before they clear those conditions to allow them to go to registration to sell the lots. So we're saying to them, in order to develop, you need to upgrade Spence Street to an urban standard. So then the drainage is not in ditches, it's in storm sewers. They'll have to do that work before we'll sign off and let them move forward.
Okay. Give me 1 second. I'll see if I've asked everything I wanted to. Just one more question. There's a reference to maintaining surface drainage routes in several places in the documents. Can somebody explain what that would mean? Mr. Slocum.
Worship, yeah, basically the idea is not to direct water into different catchment areas and maintain the flows generally in the direction that they're currently headed. So there's a ditch along Spence Street, for example. Most of that water is collected and conveyed northerly, or initially at least collected and conveyed northerly on Grenville. So that would be the route that the internal drainage would ultimately follow. You were speaking to a previous correspondence of the Hurricane Hazel flood event standard. Spence Street acts as a bit of a divide between catchment areas, with some spill permitted currently from one to another. So there's a bit of a technical balancing act, if you will, which is what the correspondence you're reading refers to. As in the detailed design, we would have to make sure that the existing conditions are matched with the future development for surface drainage routes.
One more, sorry. Surface drainage routes that they're referring to and maintaining, those would be ultimately going into, they'd be controlled by the stormwater management ponds and then diverted into other drainage systems? Is that?
The overall stormwater management system would maintain the predominant drainage, the drainage routes, or the primary drainage routes with spills as noted now. So the internal stormwater management ponds basically are designed to collect water from the internal development, store that water because of an increased rate of runoff from the development. It stores that water and slows it down before it is allowed to be released from the developed site into the trunk storm sewer of the municipalities on Grenville.
That your explanation brought up. So in the case of an extraordinary rain event, flood event, how much would be able to be handled by the drainage system that you're proposing?
If I may, the under a condition as you're describing of the Hurricane Hazel flood event standard, is going to be volume of water, it's going to be a rainfall event, it's going to be a runoff event. What happens under those conditions is that the water follows an overland route, would then eventually spill. Basically, the drainage works downward from east to west. It would spill over a low point in the road system as it works its way to the lake. That's basically how this works. So We map the profile of Grenville, for example, find the low points and say this is where the water would spill under an event such as that. It would rise to a certain level to convey the design flow that we are predicting under an event like that. And this is the level it would rise to in order to spill over the road and continue to work its way downstream. So that's all part of the work that we've been doing in cooperation with the Conservation Authority.
Okay. Councillor Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chair. In the past few weeks, I've been contacted by several members of our municipality, who have experienced water entering their properties as a result of adjacent either developments or changes to the water tables by addition of field tiles and things like that. Housing developments upstream or uphill from where they are, and each one of these was an unexpected result of the changes to the normal water flows. So when it comes to Miss Needley, when this development is done, if it is done, would you say that her situation is going to, because she describes water in her basement and some pump running all the time, would you say her situation is going to get worse, stay the same, or get better as a result of this development? Because there's going to be changes right next door, and there are several other members of the public that live adjacent to this property, and the changes that are going to be here, they're going to have some effect. I just want to know whether it's going to get better, stay the same, or get worse.
Yeah.
At this stage, I would say at least no worse and perhaps better.
I would just remind all members to address your comments to the chair. No, that's fine. Just keep our order here. Further questions or comments, or mostly questions from members of the committee? The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to our engineer and probably to Ron and a few other people. I have a series of questions, as Councillor Grace had. We're talking about, and I understand development is going to happen. It's a great spot for development to happen. I myself believe that it's a little too dense for this area. A couple things I'd like to ask about. We're building an apartment building and at the east corner of this, have we looked at the house that will be backing onto that? It's a public house, a private house with a business on there, and now it'll be having an apartment building that backs on and covers part of it. And with that, where will the parking lot be for this apartment building?
The answer is yes. We did I didn't personally myself, but the owners did. They approached the landowner to the east, and this was presented to them. I don't think they're here tonight. They're not opposed to this. The apartment building will be constructed at the north end of that lot, so as to be as far away as possible from that house. There's also a row of mature trees. If memory serves me correct, they're at least 20, maybe 25 feet high, which should serve as a well, I stand to be corrected, but when I was out on the site, I thought that's how high they were. Right there, along the lot line, which should provide for a decent buffer. When we get into site plan control agreement, which is yet another approval that's required before they can actually build the apartment building, all these issues will be addressed and nailed right down. Like right now, we're not dealing with precisely where the apartment building is going to go in the future, but the site plan agreement will. It'll say it has to go here. You have to maintain that row of hedges, or you have to put up this fence or whatever, and that's up to council and staff to deal with.
So the parking space will be where? To the south of it, backing onto Spence Street? Looking at the picture, it didn't really delineate where parking was for this.
Yeah. Well, I would say that if the building is going to the at the north end of the site, then the parking will be to the south of that.
Okay, so, Mr. Mayor, that's one I've got a series here. I'll just continue through.
Sorry, if I may. Yeah, it can't back onto Spence Street because there'll be single-family dwellings in this subdivision that will be will separate Spence Street from the apartment building.
Where are you going to put parking for how many units? 24?
24.
So you're going to need 30, 40 spaces. Where do you have that designated?
Okay. I'm going to just refer to John because John, you were part of the Mr. Mayor. Can we ask Randy to comment on that? I
sure.
did not design.
Well, I would just and you can comment to that question. I would just remind members that we should remain focused on the application at hand, which is with regard to the appropriateness of the zoning bylaw amendment, as the planner pointed out, or as the applicant pointed out. This is the question of the design of the site was something that will only happen, or another discussion that will occur at council should these zoning bylaw amendments be approved. So it's important, I think, just for a matter of expedition here, that we focus as much as we can on the appropriateness of the zoning bylaw amendment. But we can certainly have this question answered.
And how many floors? So it'll be a 4-story building. Parking in the 3 more floors? Okay. Back to our drainage issue. Grenville does not have sewers on it, so most of the water that will come off Spence crosses the road, goes down Peel Street or into the storm, and there are no storm sewers on Grenville Street. So our sewers end at the corner of Spence and Grenville or Morpeth and Grenville. Where you're going to tie in, if you're going up to Morpeth, you're going to be chugging a lot of stuff to go from there to get to Grenville Street, Grenville and Spence. The rest of Spence from Grenville to Gray has sewers now, but it doesn't have stormwater sewers. Are we going to be building, who's responsible for putting that section of Spence Street up to municipal standards? I guess that would be directed to Amanda.
And through you, that would be something that we work out as part of the conditions of subdivision for approval. So if the engineer can show that the pipe capacity can be handled by the downstream ditch, then there is not a need to upgrade at this time. If they need that outlet and they need that upgrade, then that's something that would be built by the developer, and it could be in conjunction with development charges if it services more than one development. But that's one of the things that we work through during the draft plan conditions.
Okay. Traffic is going to be, as was mentioned, is a huge issue here. We just put in a 52-unit complex half a block away, which I'm very familiar with. Now we're going to put another 68. So we're looking at another 100, 150 vehicles traveling these roads. They will not be going down Spence. They'll be taking Gray and Grenville to get to Peel, and either taking it out to Carlisle or right McNabb to the beer store corner. And these roads are not at that standard yet. We have half of a graded road. Will we be fixed? And again, this is how much will our developer be looking into this? Our community, Amanda, will be looking at that. I worry about the number of cars that will now be traveling these roads. We do not have sidewalks anywhere in that area. There'll be kids in this. They'll be walking to school. There are no sidewalks for them. How are we going to address this? Are you planning sidewalks anywhere for this subdivision? Okay.
Maybe.
So So
Amanda?
again, through you, so the Transportation Master Plan consultant has this as a development coming in, so we've given them all the future developments up to what we know for 2023. So this is incorporated into what they're looking at in their recommendations. We don't have a sidewalk policy approved by council, other than our official plan, which says sidewalks on one side of local roads and two sides of collectors. And again, external works become negotiated and work through between the staff and developer. We bring that stuff back to you when it comes to registration for council's approval at that time.
Okay. Last thing I want to say, Mr. Mayor, is the access off of Grenville. If there's any way you can change that to having two access points coming off of Spence, I think it's a little hard on the neighbor that'll be sitting right there to have the driveway curving right around the back corner of his house. If we can look at that anywhere, any way to change that access point, that would be, I think, go a long way to helping the people be more tolerant of this development.
Okay. Thank you. Councilor Rich.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. So I like to kind of simplify things at the end. There were a lot of questions around, and thanks a lot for asking them, Cheryl. So it's wet. The engineer is saying that our capacity can handle all the water that is going to run off because of the changes in the pond designs. And did I understand from Amanda that we will be double checking that, or that we're going forward to check that, or we agree, concur?
And through, yes, so the engineer submits a plan that shows how they're going to hold back the water so that it matches the peak flows that we've set as criteria. We review that internally, and before they move forward, we sign off.
Thank you. Thank you. And through you, Mr. Mayor. So the other issue that's obviously brought forward is density, right? And in keeping with the flavor of the neighborhood, I guess it would be to Mr. Davidson. The question would be, would this development, could you foresee a development that would not include the apartment building, for example, that would have townhouses in that location instead, that would maybe be more in keeping with the flavor of the region?
I think if we're going to get a comment, it would be nice to get it at the microphone, please.
As the planning consultant, that's certainly not my call, but the owners are here tonight and they're listening. Obviously be discussing this later on.
Get Vice Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to thank the people for attending this evening, Mr. Mayor. I think this is the way the process should work. And hopefully people leave this evening, this presentation and the next presentation will have a lot of their questions answered. And I think this is the way the process should work. And if the questions aren't answered here this evening, I know we've got a very open staff that, and planners send comments in and ask questions. The first speaker, thank you for your presentation, and very articulate and very well detailed. One of the comments I heard that was concerning to me, and this is perhaps for Mr. Slocum or Amanda, was with sewage capacity. And I heard a comment that with the 40 new long-term care beds that are hopefully going to happen in the next 6 months, year, it'd be great for the community. With those 40 new beds, I heard a comment that those 40 new beds are going to create an overflow situation. The sewage has no place to go, and there'll be a new station. It'll be filtered through the new station, but the station's not built yet, so we're going to have a sewage problem. Can you comment on that? That just hit a nerve with me that I can't. I have trouble understanding how we would have a sewage capacity problem.
Sure, and through you, in the water wastewater master plan, this is an area that's identified as a future pumping station area. We looked at that when they came in to see how we could accommodate the development. We don't have a policy here where we commit flows to developments that aren't draft approved, but what we did do is commit to the Southampton Care Center that because we know the importance of them, that we would ensure that there was capacity there when they got the funding. They're not in an approval stage for that doubling of their size that they're at. So we have that capacity reserved. The 4 liters per second is what was left over, and there's also what they've come back with, what they would need for capacity. We've identified that we would like them to look at one length of pipe that we know is close to capacity or could be over capacity. It would be an offsite works where they're replacing one length of pipe, and that would allow them to go down to pump station 1 that's existing instead of waiting for the future sanitary pumping station. If that does not work, that's not what they want to do, they have a fallback position on this sanitary pumping station. We would work through them with front-ending agreements, development charges, different mechanisms to get that sanitary pumping station built in the time that they would need it.
And the pumping station, then, what I'm hearing is that the increased number of beds at the Southampton Care Centre, through you, Mr. Mayor, sorry, it would be, that would come first before this development. Is that what I'm hearing?
And through you, Mr. Mayor, that is what we, as staff, have said, yes, because they've been in this queue for so long with the funding that we would not jeopardize that.
So that cost, none of that cost would be borne by the new developer?
There would be no cost to that piece because it's already accounted. It's almost like it exists. Okay. It's whether their flows need to increase from that point.
Thanks, Amanda.
Anything further from any members? I just had one question for the planner as to the affordable housing policies. And it says here in your report that we talk about density and that this exceeds the density requirement, that minimum 30% density requirement. But the first paragraph in the report, that the county and local municipalities shall strive to ensure that 30% of new residential development and residential intensification be affordable to meet the housing needs of incomes up to the 60th percentile in local municipalities. You don't speak to whether this development meets that criteria. At least I don't see it in the report. And so I just wonder if you could make a comment. Does this development live up to that standard or request?
I don't have details at this time as to the rate that is going to be charged to these. I don't know if the owners can speak to that at all. So I don't think there's any kind of subsidized housing being proposed here, but in terms of, that's a different consideration of affordable, as mentioned, the 60th percentile. But I can see if we can get that information for the next report.
Do the developers have any comment with regard to that?
Mr. Mayor, thank you. So our objection may not be affordable housing, but attainable. One of the comments that when we met with the planning department was that the availability of long-term rental was a need, and that's where the idea of having the apartment units was born from, that we were taking commentary back from the municipality as part of our development, and as well the size and scope of the townhomes being attainable as well. I believe the mandate of affordable being 300,000 or less might fall within that range for some of the apartment units, but perhaps not for the townhomes.
I think I just point out that affordability is an extremely high priority issue. Absolutely. For the town of Saugeen Shores, for this council, for this community, and I would encourage your consultant as well as the planner to discuss that matter before you come back to us and come back to us with some strong plans around affordability and looking at the standards that have been laid out by the county and others as to what that means. That's certainly a very important issue to me anyway, and I'm sure it is to my colleagues.
Absolutely, thank you. And that's where the idea of having the higher density with the apartment building came from.
Okay, if there's nothing further then...
Sorry.
Oh, do you have something else?
I was to include my name and I didn't. Sorry. Brett Nodwell, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for doing that. Okay, so that brings us to the end of that public meeting. Thanks everyone for your input on that one. And yeah, sure. Yeah, why don't we take a break for... we'll reconvene at 1:45. Oh, sorry. Just before everybody departs, I apologize. One thing I need to do is, if you have an interest in that file that we've just discussed, there is a sign-up sheet outside the room. So please, on your way out, if you're leaving, sign that sign-up sheet so that we can give you updates as this file progresses. This matter will be returning to council at a future date. Thank you. We'll reconvene at quarter to.
Testing 1 2. Testing 1 2 3.
Just give us a couple more minutes. Appreciate your patience. Okay, we'll call the meeting back to order. Appreciate everybody's patience while we sort ourselves out technically so we can make sure as many people in the hallway and everywhere can hear as best as possible. So that moves us on to our second public meeting of the evening, which is SSOPA 32-18.48, Bay Street Area Woodlands. And I'll turn it over to the planner, Daniel, for the report.
Okay, thank you. So this application proposes to amend the town's official plan as it relates to the significant woodlands policies that impact the properties, specifically policy 2.6.8.2C. The application is by George Durgan on behalf of a number of property owners within the project area. So the subject lands here are the red shaded area. It's approximately 11.9 hectares in size. It's bounded by Albert Street, Huron Street, Island Street, and Bay Street. It's comprised of 15 different assessment parcels under the ownership of 6 different people or entities. The lands are currently used for recreational purposes. There's a trail that runs through it. And it's characterized by a number of natural heritage features. Surrounding uses include residential, recreational, and a seasonal trailer park are located on it. The lands are serviceable by municipal water and sewer. So, as mentioned, the lands are impacted by Official Plan Policy 2.6.8.2C, which states development is not permitted in significant woodlands, which are defined as being greater than 4 hectares in this area of the municipality. So the amendment proposes to create a special policy area over the subject lands that would implement a similar set of policies for the significant woodlands that exist in other areas of the municipality. It does not propose to change the significance of the woodland feature, so it would continue to be called a significant woodland. Within other areas of the municipality, which I'll get into further in the presentation, development may be permitted in significant woodlands upon demonstrating no negative impacts to the natural heritage features on the lands or their ecological function. A supplemental significant woodland study was submitted in support of the application. The study is supplemental to the significant woodland study that was conducted north of the Saugeen River prior to the last official plan update in 2012. So in terms of the local official plan designation, the subject area contains both the residential designation and the environmental hazard designation. So the residential is that it's kind of masked by an orange overlay, but this area here is the residential, and this is the environmental hazard designation in the official plan. Those are not proposed to change as part of this application. It's strictly looking at that woodlands policy. In terms of the zoning, there's an environmental protection zone, which is this blue area, a planned development zone, which is pink, and right along Island Street here in the north, there's an open space zone, an R2 and an R1 zone. So, as I noted, the town has 3 different sets of woodlands policies as they relate to significant woodlands. This area is known as Special Policy Area 4, and it has its own set of woodlands policies whereby development is permitted subject to demonstrating through an EIS, an environmental impact study, no negative impacts to the natural heritage feature or their ecological function. And there's some other policies associated with the woodlands, such as a tree retention plan requirement for some lots, and some other policies related to natural heritage features outside of the woodlands. This area north of the Saugeen River in Southampton is known as the Significant Woodlands Study Area, and it too has its own set of policies related to significant woodlands. And similar to Special Policy Area 4, development can be contemplated in significant woodlands subject to demonstrating no negative impacts through an EIS. The study, this area was studied in 2011 prior to the last official plan update, and a similar study to the one that was submitted in support of this application was submitted to support those policy changes. Well, this one's hard to read, but small writing. But in terms of agency consultation, we did receive a few comments back. Town staff indicated they've reviewed the file, the request, and they have no objections. The historic Saugeen Métis indicated that their understanding of the file is that any future development would be subject to other development criteria if the proposed amendment is approved, including the preparation of an EIS, and they indicated no objection or opposition. The properties the SVCA indicated that the properties are affected by floodplain, wetlands, and they looked at the supplemental significant woodland study and determined that for their purposes of analyzing the proposed amendment, the supplemental woodland study was satisfactory. They also noted that the existing environmental hazard designation and EP zoning are acceptable to staff, SVCA staff. Those lines were last updated with the official plan update in 2012. They also indicated that lands contain significant woodland, fish habitat, significant wildlife habitat, potential habitat for threatened or endangered species, and wetlands. The SVCA, through this application, was not prepared to comment on hazard policies until a site-specific development is submitted. And they conclude by stating, based on their understanding of the amendment, they feel it conforms to the the significant woodland policies in the PPS. So we did receive a number of comments and concerns through the public notice. Those concerns that we received, or those comments that we received prior to March 11th, were included in the staff report. Some came after that, and they'll be included in the next staff report. So all comments, including those tonight, will be considered by planning staff, and we'll report back on those in the next staff report. But broadly speaking, there's concerns about natural heritage impacts, natural hazard impacts, traffic impacts, process concerns, loss of the trail, concerns regarding the studies submitted in support of the application, and the accuracy of information. So on that, I'll just note that the public notice that went out inadvertently stated the policy amendment was for 26.2.2C, which doesn't exist. It's actually for 2682C. However, the notice did contain explanatory wording that correctly explained the purpose and effect of the amendment. A second note I'll comment on the notice was Kincardine was referenced in the explanatory note, not the town of Saugeen Shores. The explanatory note is for the purpose of letting people know their comments will be entered into the public record and preserve their appeal rights should they wish to appeal. Again, the proper information regarding where to address comments was included on the application. And as some people may be aware, the Bruce County Planning Office in Port Elgin handles the planning matters for Kincardine as well. So I will sort of conclude, I guess, to recap. The proposal is to create a special policy area on the subject lands to allow for an alternative approach to assessing development impacts on the woodland, the significant woodlands located on the subject lands. If approved, development could be contemplated on portions of the land, subject to the results of an EIS and the other requirements of the official plan. Subsequent Planning Act applications would be required for any development on the lands. The recommendation is that the report is received for information.
Okay, thank you. I'll ask the applicant if anybody would like to speak on their behalf.
Yes, good evening. I am Ron Davidson. I'm a planning consultant. I'm here tonight with this gentleman right in front of me here. It's John Morton. He operates the business Aquatic and Wildlife Services. He is a wildlife expert. John is the author of the Woodland Study, significant woodland study that was submitted as part of this official plan amendment application. John and I have both been retained by a party of three, if you will, John, Paul, George, Paul, and Dave. They're seated right here. They own 5 of the 15 parcels that Dan has said is subject to this application, and they also have an interest in acquiring another 9, and they have formal offers to purchase on that. And then there's the 15th parcel, which is owned by Mr. John Morganroth, and he's here tonight somewhere behind me. So the official plan amendment is just the beginning of a very long process for possibly getting some of the lands approved for development. And I choose my words carefully there. At the present time, the town's official plan includes a policy for this particular area of Southampton that simply does not allow for any development to be considered whatsoever. Thank you. Save that to the end if you like. The official plan, this policy, however, this specifically to this area of Southampton, is unique in Saugeen Shores. It's just to this area. It's the only area in Southampton that you have this policy. You did have it, as Dan indicated, north of the river until a few years ago, and you also had it elsewhere, I believe, just south of the former boundaries of Southampton until a couple years ago.
If you just wouldn't mind just speaking closer to the mic. The folks out in the hall are just having some difficulty hearing.
My apologies.
Just to be nice and clear.
Anyway, in about 2012 or 2013, the town hired a consultant to do a significant woodland study for 2 of the 3 sites. That woodland study resulted in changes to your official plan where you removed that restrictive policy. Okay, not considered at that time, was not part of the study, was this area. So the policy that you have now, again, it's not reflected in the provincial policy statement with regard to significant woodlands. It's not recognized in the county official plan. It's just a restrictive policy that you have here. The provincial policy statement does not state no development in a significant woodland. It states that no development or site alteration is permitted within a significant woodland or the adjacent lands, and that's defined as 120 meters within the boundary of a woodland, unless it can be demonstrated that such development or site alteration would not negatively impact the woodland or its function. So again, to be clear, the provincial policy statement does not state no development whatsoever. So the intent of this official plan amendment, number 32, it's just the very beginning of a very long process, as I said. The applicant is very well aware that some of the lands subject to this amendment will never be developed. We're not here tonight suggesting that these lands are going to be developed. That's not what we're asking for. If you peel back the significant woodland overlay, which is in fact an overlay, a lot of the lands are designated environmental hazard, and that mapping is accurate in some instances, and it's not accurate in others. How do we know that? Because this fellow in front of me, John Morton, did an environmental impact study for some of the lands. So in addition to doing the woodland study for the whole site, he studied some of the lands, and he has determined that, among other things, that some of that environmental hazard land is not correct. That boundary should be redelineated. And of course, the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority would be the people that chime in on that and tell your council if in fact they agree with that. If the EIS had concluded that the hazard land mapping was correct, then we probably wouldn't be here tonight, because it would serve no purpose removing the significant woodland overlay. So if this amendment gets approved, the owners would then order an environmental impact study to be done on the rest of the lands that are subject to this amendment. And through that environmental impact study, the exact hazard boundaries will be determined. And the Conservation Authority in the town will decide again if the EIS is correct in this regard. Should the official plan amendment before you get approved, and once the EIS has been accepted, and we know exactly what lands are developable and what lands are not, we would then begin working with the town, the county, and the Conservation Authority on a development proposal. That development proposal would require approvals of an official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment, severances and or a plan of subdivision, and perhaps a plan of condominium. Don't know, because we really don't know what we're dealing with just yet. But there's a lengthy process for that to go through. As part of the review process of those applications, if we get that far, the neighbors would once again be involved. We would be required to submit all the standard reports, planning report, environmental impact study, stormwater management report, functional service report, an archaeological assessment, and perhaps traffic study. If we get that far where we do have a development proposal, that's assuming again the future environmental impact studies say that there's developable land here, then we would be willing to meet with the neighbors in advance of having a formal application presented. We would do a public consultation or public open house, if you will, and that's something that we've done in the past in the town here. I've been involved with. On a final note, I wish to add that even if an environmental impact study recommends that a certain area of a significant woodland can be developed, just so it's clear, that doesn't mean a developer can clear-cut the land. That's not what it means. The EIS will include requirements for significant tree retention, among other things. And also keep in mind that the environmental impact study looks at other matters, not just significant woodland, but it looks for habitat for threatened and endangered species, wetlands, etc. I wish to point out that the town has looked at several and approved several projects in the last few years involving significant woodlands. And I can name 5 here if there's no sense in getting into it, but I've been involved with those. And then as Dan has indicated, the Conservation Authority does find this official plan amendment to be acceptable on the basis that it doesn't get us very far. It opens the door for further studies to be done to see if there's developable land here. That's as far as this official plan amendment gets us. And lastly, it was suggested that from the town staff that it may be beneficial for everyone that before this comes back to your council that we sit down with the neighbors, or at least some of them anyways. I don't know if we can possibly meet with this many people to discuss this matter. We did share, there was an environmental impact study done, as I said, for a small portion of one of the properties, or a portion of one of the properties, and we did share that with the one landowner, Mr. Putnam. He asked for that, and we provided that. But if there's a benefit to all, we'd be willing to sit down with the neighbors and talk about this. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of council.
Okay, thank you. So now I'll ask members of the public, if there's any member of the public who'd like to speak, we just come to the microphone. What you can do is we'll just take you one at a time, and hopefully we can get you in order there. So I would just ask every speaker just to make sure you speak close to that microphone and nice and loud, just so folks in the hallway can hear us, and also just remind you to state your name for the record when you begin speaking. So go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and councillors, for the opportunity to discuss this very important issue this evening. My name is Brian Putman, and my wife and I own a cottage on Cole Boulevard in Southampton. Other than presenting council with a consolidated petition to reject the OP amendment that is before you tonight, I would like to take just a few minutes to express some important points that I would like you to consider. I plan to be brief to allow others here tonight the opportunity to express their views. I'm assuming that you have all had the opportunity to read the petition. Do I need to read it into the minutes?
No, I don't think so. Members have it.
Great. Thank you. 395 property owners, permanent and seasonal residents, and interested persons are petitioning Saugeen Shores Municipal Council to reject Saugeen Shores Official Plan Amendment Application SSOPA 32-18.48. As councillors, you should have received a copy of the Phase 1 petition submission, which included all electronic signatures from 304 interested persons opposed to the OP amendment application, and which was submitted by the deadline date of March 11th. Since that time, an additional 91 people have also signed. This document includes all names and signatures, electronic or in writing, received up to noon today. First and foremost, it's important to note that I am personally not against development. I understand that Saugeen Shores is facing exceptional growth pressures resulting from the multi-year refurbishment commitment at Bruce Power, combined with increased interest in the area by boomers retiring and moving to Lake Huron shoreline communities. I understand this, and I recognize that if handled properly, smart and considerate development may occur in the town to enrich all of our lives. But we must approach development in a way that recognizes and maintains the unique quality of Saugeen Shores and our individual communities. So no, I'm not against development, but I am against development that is destructive to the neighborhood and the community. And development within the subject area will, without doubt, be very destructive to all properties, not only within the zone of influence, but to the community as a whole. The official plan amendment application does not need to be approved by virtue of the Provincial Planning Statement, or PPS, as the developer's application would lead you to believe. Part 3 of the PPS reads, quote, "The provincial policy statement is more than a set of individual policies. It is to be read in its entirety, and the relevant policies are to be applied to each situation. When more than one policy is relevant, a decision maker should consider all of the relevant policies to understand how they work together." It goes on to say that, quote, "The policies of the provincial policy statement represent minimum standards. Within the framework of the provincial policy-led planning system, planning authorities and decision makers may go beyond these minimum standards to address matters of importance to a specific community, unless doing so would conflict with any policy of the provincial policy statement. So as a municipal council and planning authority, you may maintain the current development restriction on the subject lands and still be consistent with the provincial policy statement and the Saugeen Shores official plan. However, if you take the position that the provincial planning statement should direct your actions, may I point out the following sections of the PPS which may not have been brought to your attention. The PPS points out that, quote, "Strong, livable, and healthy communities promote and enhance human health and social well-being, are economically and environmentally sound, and are resilient to climate change." I ask you, does the town have in place a climate change plan? The PPS goes on to say that, quote, "The province's natural heritage resources, water resources, including the Great Lakes, provide important environmental, economic, and social benefits. The wise use and management of these resources over the long term is a key provincial interest. The province must ensure that its resources are managed in a sustainable way to conserve biodiversity, protect essential ecological processes, and public health and safety, provide for the production of food and fiber, minimize environmental and social impacts, and meet its long-term needs." In summary, the provincial policy statement stresses that, quote, "It is equally important to protect the overall health and safety of the population. The provincial policy statement directs development away from areas of natural and human-made hazards." These are not just motherhood and apple pie statements. In fact, the PPS is prescriptive about the priority of development that planning authorities must undertake. Section 1.1.3.3 of the PPS states, quote, "Planning authorities shall identify appropriate locations and promote opportunities for intensification and redevelopment where this can be accommodated, taking into account existing building stock or areas, including brownfield sites, and the availability of suitable existing or planned infrastructure and public service facilities required to accommodate projected needs." Has the town identified areas of intensification, redevelopment, and remediation? With respect to the development within areas of fish spawning, Section 2.1.6 of the PPS specifically indicates that, quote, Development and site alteration shall not be permitted in fish habitat except in accordance with provincial and federal requirements. The SVCA report makes no reference to the spawning of fish within the 5 streams that cross the subject area. There are several more sections within the PPS that prevent development and site alteration within the habitat of endangered and threatened species, or within, quote, a floodway, regardless of whether the area of inundation contains high points of land not subject to flooding. The provincial policy statement is very clear about the need for planning authorities to prioritize future development in areas of redevelopment and intensification, to conserve biodiversity and to restrict development in such areas. It is important to note that maintaining the current development restriction in the subject area is consistent with the PPS. Ladies and gentlemen of Council, are you prepared to allow for the consideration of development within the subject area, the last protected significant woodland and wetland within the town of Southampton? Will this be your legacy? Once the decision is made to open the subject area for consideration of development, the thin edge of the wedge will be thrust into the subject area and the damage will be done. The damage will be irreversible and permanent. Will this be your legacy? I, and at least 394 other individuals, would naturally prefer that we need not continue to meet Council on this important matter in the future, and that Council, as decision makers, vote in favor of rejecting this official plan amendment application that is before you tonight. While we are hopeful that Council does the right thing, we are prepared. We know that approval of this application will signal the beginning of a long challenge before us all, a challenge that we, as property owners, residents, taxpayers, and visitors to Saugeen Shores are determined to meet head on. Thank you for your time tonight.
All right. The next person, please.
This the slideshow thing? You'll have to excuse me. This technology thing's kind of getting to me. I spent my entire career in technology. I still can't use one of these. You say alakazam or what? How do I? Oh, there I am. Okay. Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm so glad I'm the second speaker because he's already taken about half of my my slides. And I'll cut out all my good jokes. You'll have to wait till the next time I come in front of you to talk to those. I'm not here to overlap a presentation of others, so I'll be cutting mine down significantly. I'm happy to discuss one-on-one some of the things that I'm passionate about or some of my background.
Sorry, would you just state your name for the record? Apologies.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, sorry. Howdy do. I'm John Willits. I live at 159 South Rankin. I do not own any property adjacent to or around this particular piece of property. I'm on the other side of the rivers. No, some of the stuff on the other side of the main part of town where I own any property here in town. Development is inevitable. I spent the last 30 years in Brampton. I'm happy to get out, but I did spend a lot of time at city council planning meetings, and they're all about the same, really. Sorry, no offense, but it's true. I am going to present to you some examples of social, financial, environmental impact when you do encroach on significant habitat. Well, this is working great. I'm going to skip that page. Okay. Just a quick brief background of me, and the reason I'm doing this is I understand the context. I was co-chair of the Brampton Environmental Advisory Committee for the City of Brampton. That was a committee of council focusing specifically on directions and projects within Brampton. Brampton actually has 2 water courses going through it. I also played a role in the Places to Grow and a visual plan for Brampton and the town of Caledon. I've been a subject matter witness at the OMB. I was going to put in there subject matter expert, but my wife said don't do that. I'm also on the board of directors for the Marine Heritage Society. I'm a captain with them. I'm responsible for the boat and also responsible for the maintenance in the lighthouse. The last line there, for 14 years I was president of an NGO called the Clareville Environmental Group, and we were working with the City of Toronto, the City of Brampton, and the Toronto Regional Conservation Authority on a variety of issues. In my 30 years in Brampton, I saw that town go from the flower town to the 10th largest city in Canada. And working with the TRCA, there were a lot of projects that came up that using the best science at the time stated no negative impact. These were small developments on the edge of significant wetlands and significant forests. Over time, over those 30 years, we saw those forests deplete and those wetlands perish. Now, the sad thing is they've gone through 3 executive directors, and I don't think there's a single member in council, so I've got no one to say I told you so to. Often the TRCA was caught with lack of concrete data. One time they were looking for a hydrogeologist. They have one now, but they didn't have one then. And a proposal was put through by the town and unfortunately the roadway and the development shifted the watershed. And again, there was significant loss of wetland after no negative impact was assured. I heard in meetings like this where city councillors felt forced to take unnecessary risks. And the arguments going back across the table, well, look, we let it go for this forest. They're going to take us to the OMB. We're going to spend a lot of money on it, and we're going to lose. That happened time and time again. Over the time of this process, I came to be a fan of Sir Ebenezer Howard. Now, anybody who's taken their planning thing recognizes that fellow's name. In the turn of the century, in 1900, he developed this Garden City strategy. And really what that was is it was the densification of population where there was a variety of different types of housing, where there was public green space, as well as agricultural green space, and natural areas. And this is kind of like this drawing here, just because I like the lettering on it more than everything else, but he does include things like the concern for water supply. The features and functions that Sir Ebenezer Howard talked about also appear in the Places to Grow campaign. Saugeen Shores and Southampton have a strong town and country balance, something that Ebenezer Howard was striving for in his proposals. And there's a connection with nature here, and I'm just going to jump ahead really quickly, and its importance to our members of the community. At the Legion at the St. Patrick's Day party, most of the talk was about the 2 bald eagles they saw, the river coming out, the deer, the fox, and the coyote that were howling around the soccer park. It's really someplace that's very, very important to our community. Places to Grow was established, and some of their founding principles is to promote densification. But it states clearly that it's to preserve green space, agriculture, and natural features, not to infill on protected areas. I'm moving ahead as quick as I can, folks. The Planning Act also does the same, brings the same part up. The Woodland Study, to me, identifies that it is a high-functioning habitat that we're talking about here, with a lot of interconnections. The Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority, your head of planning stated that the Saugeen Valley said that it was okay to go. But then 10 pages before that, it talked about it being a significant woodlot of high value. It talked about endangered and possibly at risk and possibly endangered species in it. Most pages are stating how important the place is. This is something that I came up with. Where's the arrow on this? Here? Okay. So this is the Ontario Government Source Water Protection Atlas. This is an online, and I encourage you to do it. But this is, there it is there. There's Saugeen Shores, and you can see all the little rivulets that are coming down. This is source water protection. This is the form and function. What was described to me is that, in fact, this area operates very much like a small Oak Ridges moraine, where the water comes down off of the tableland up here around 21, is filtered through the old beach sand, the seasonal wetlands, and the wetlands and marshes that exist along in here before filtering the water before it goes into the lake. And these big blue dots, I found out, is actually our water intake area. Something I found out just before I got here talking to my son, in Calgary, there's a $500 fine for washing your car. The reason for that is that the soap and the contaminants that you put into the street go into the storm sewers and go into the Bow River. Now, they're smart enough to put their waste down river from where they take it out, but that's so important for them. Wrong one here. In Toronto, they're not as lucky as us here in Saugeen Shores. We have still a lot of our wetlands and functioning marshes. The TRCA has gone about this great project, and I helped them with it, is the recreation of seasonal wetlands and marshes. And this is an example here of one that they had to build. It never works as good as the original natural one. And one of the parts of the project is this thing here, and that's a clay layer berm. And that's to stop the water from leaking out. And the previous proposal to this council talked about the building of houses and the redirecting of water and draining away wetlands. Well, if that's the foundation of a house, what I would do if I was building my nice 9-foot basement is I'd put a bunch of gravel in here, big O there, and then pipe it right into my my pump and pump it out onto the street. What we found out in Toronto, in Saugeen, in the Valleylands, is that that's in fact draining those swamps, or as it would be in those tablelands, draining those tablelands in the previous proponent. World's lost 65% of its wetlands. Toronto is 85%. They're not the largest. I think California's lost 91. Of that 85% of the original wetlands, half was lost since 1970. The Conservation Authority Act in Canada started in 1946. That's even after the Conservation Act was in place. We've still been losing wetland. Naturally function is far better and cheaper. Building beside wetlands, the sewers and sump pumps drain it. It's happened time and time again. If that one, loss of forest, somebody's going to talk about that one. Prepare and prevent, or repair and repent. The Golden Horseshoe used to be known for fruit. It's no longer known for fruit. It's known for... The TRCA is on an active, and if you go onto their website, they'll boast about all the restoration work they're doing, not the protection. My family, we used to go to Gravenhurst in Collingwood as a vacation home. But as soon as Gravenhurst and Collingwood became Mississauga North, we decided not to. You know, the Ministry of Parks and Rec and the National Parks had opened up backcountry hiking. This is the low impact, carry it in, carry it out strategy. And at the time, the good science said there'll be no negative impact. Well, a decade or so in, they're realizing it's having an impact. The future of potential. This is a picture of a place that I really like and a place I don't really like. This is the Assiniboine Park, or Assiniboine Forest in Winnipeg. Some argue it's the only good thing in Winnipeg, but there's some nice folks there too. They've turned this into a huge park. This is actually the forest area. The guy that runs it is a fellow called Frank Caldwell, and this is 1,100 acres. And it's something that perhaps Saugeen Shores should look at for future, for the tourism, and to demonstrate leadership in environmental protection. And it's kind of nice to have it beside a nuclear reactor, I think, as well. Ladies and gentlemen, development is inevitable, and we don't want to make the same mistakes that Brampton has. Encroachment is death by 1,000 cuts. It opens the floodgates because we did it for him, we have to do it for them. I just remembered something I was going to say, folks, because I am trying to rush through this. Back in that picture of Saugeen Shores in the water, the forest area that you granted the special privileges to was outside that water lane area. I think it might be slightly different characteristics in the area we're talking about here. Encroachment is death by 1,000 cuts. It opens the floodgates. We don't have the capacity to monitor and police and to go back after the fact, and I'm living proof that there's nobody to tell you I told you so too. And we lose the environment, the integrity and nature and character of our community. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, and next person, please.
My name's Hildy Rees-Smart, and I have a property at 415 Huron. I'm directly across from this area. And I'm impressed with the articulation and the detail that was presented, so I'm going to just give my personal, for the most part, response to this. One of them is, and that's perhaps due to the fact that I'm not sure about the processes that take place with this kind of initiative, but the AWS study was a roadside assessment, so it was taken, for my understanding, from the outside, that it was not a study of the interior of these woodlands. That's in the report. And so I question, whether a decision can be made on something that has not been fully studied. Like what is in the interior? We don't know. And I don't think it's right to make a decision based on something that you don't know. That's one. In the report, the threatened vertebrates, Table 3, of the 9 listed vertebrates, 7 are threatened or of special concern. That's a problem. Habitat. Of the 19 habitats listed in Table 5, 13 were deemed suitable for a variety of birds in WOD 15 and 16. WOD 15 was also suitable to 3 out of 4 reptiles, for bats, and various plants. And as mentioned before, that there's the idea of fish habitat. I personally have seen a fish trying to climb the rocks on the stream that's 2 doors south of me, which means something's going on up ahead. And we have destroyed so much of what is going on in the fishery industry in our lakes. Do we want to create more harm? Monarch butterflies. It states that the monarch is of special concern, but there is no suitable habitat for them. And secondly, that a migratory stopover is not applicable to Bruce County. Well, last summer, late in the summer, you could have come to my property and there were dozens of monarchs hanging from the cedar trees. I'm in the direct flight path of these butterflies. So they're coming from somewhere, and they have to survive somewhere. So does that property help them? I think we should know. It was spectacular. I'd never seen anything like that. Loss of habitat. The greatest threat to living things, wild things, is the fracturing of the habitat, so that you get a piece here, a piece there, so that they're no longer connected. This property is connected to further south, so there is a corridor of woodland here. And the other part is the elimination of habitat. If you start building houses, condominiums or whatever, you are eliminating habitat. No impact. Well, something was mentioned about, washing cars, but it's more than that. Lights that are on at night affect creatures because they get disoriented. They think it's daytime. There are, excuse me for a minute, concrete, asphalt, bulldozers, grading of terrain. These are not hospitable. And there's noise, chemicals, and cats and dogs. These do not allow wild creatures to thrive. And then I was really thrown by the statement that it has no economic or social value. It's in the report, read it. Cottagers and visitors love Southampton. I've been coming here for 34 years. Why? Because I love it. You can go swimming, you can go sailing, you can go walking in the woods. The kids love Ghost Hill or whatever they call it. Right? It gives them an experience, and they want to go back again. So these woods are important to the tourism and to the cottagers, and those people bring in a lot of the money in this town. What those people need is those experiences that they can't get elsewhere. That's why they're here. The next point is that there's no social value in a child discovering a frog, a snake, a hawk. Somebody mentioned eagles. You need places for them to thrive, or you don't have them. Which brings me to my last point. The World Wildlife Fund, released a report last year called the Living Planet Report. And in that report, since 1970 to 2014, we have lost 60% of our vertebrates. Now, this is worldwide. Canada has lost 50% of its vertebrates. And of that 50%,
half of it is at the rate of 83 or 87%, which means they're going to go. No question. So where are we? What do we want to do? Shall we be part of the problem, or shall we be part of the solution to this problem? We've got a problem of a disappearing world. Thank you.
Okay, the next speaker, please. Sir.
Yes, my name is Craig Salby, and my wife and I have spent either as tourist seasonal residents or the last 9 years as a permanent resident in Southampton. So it's a community that I cherish, and it's also a community that I think has a lot of special natural area heritage and values. With that, I did have a little, and I can hand these out, just a letter that I wanted to read. And I did send it to the county, and they advised that they would send it to you on the next round, because I was late getting it in on March the 11th. Anyway, thank you for the opportunity to speak to Council about the proposed official plan amendment to amend the significant woodland policies of the town of Saugeen Shores official plan to allow for consideration of development of 15 properties within the town. Both the January 29th, 2019 Saugeen Valley Conservation Letter and the November 2018 AWS Environmental Consultant Report confirmed that the subject woodlands are significant woodlands, and the woodlands have features that make the site very important from a natural heritage perspective. The Saugeen Valley Conservation Letter highlights this and states the woodland study has identified the following natural heritage features on and adjacent to the subject properties: significant woodlands, fish habitat, endangered and threatened species, significant wildlife habitat, and wetlands. This site obviously serves many important ecological functions and is a valuable natural asset within the urban landscape of Southampton and the broader community of Saugeen Shores. Mr. Davidson's Landscape Planning Consulting November 29th letter on page 9 states, at the direction of town staff, Mr. Davidson and Mr. Morgenroth are proposing to change this restrictive policy as it applies to 15 parcels of land. In the letter, it states also on page 9, it should be noted that the approval of this amendment will not directly facilitate immediate development. Should this official plan amendment be approved, the developer will simply have some assurance that development could be considered on these lands. Further, on page 7 in the Davidson's report, it acknowledges that municipal water and sewers can be readily extended to the service areas for the various subject parcels. I see that as saying at this time, there's probably not surfaced at this time. Given the natural significance of the site and no immediate development, would it not be more appropriate for the town to deal with this whole matter when updating the official plan versus through an OP amendment? The OP will be updated in the near future, and that's where I feel it should be dealt with, based on the number of people that strongly want to have a natural asset kept in this town. Saugeen Valley Conservation Letter clearly serves notice to all partners the need to address fish habitat and habitat of threatened and endangered species, and such development will not be permitted except in accordance with provincial and federal requirements. This is particularly important and critical with respect to habitat of endangered and threatened species. The policies of the Provincial Policy Statement 2.17 do not support development and site alteration in habitat of endangered or threatened species except in accordance with provincial and federal requirements. And I'm taking that from the letters. That's in those letters. It's also in the letter, it's the responsibility of the applicant to ensure endangered and threatened species policies referred to in the provincial policy statement are appropriately addressed. with respect to fish habitat and specifically with respect to threatened and endangered species, I would recommend that the County and Town Council consult with and receive advice from provincial and federal agencies on further studies and assessments that may need to be considered for this official plan amendment proposal. And the reason I say that is if you proceed without doing the necessary groundwork with the approval agencies that want to be heard from, you put yourself in a delicate situation. And I've seen this in the province because of the job I used to hold, where some development's done properly in due process, and in other cases it isn't. I'm not suggesting it's not done because this is a new process here that you're putting forth, but as I mentioned before, I do feel that the official plan review is where you should be studying this in terms of the designation of those lands, not through an OP amendment that just deals with the fact that the criteria meets a woodland criteria for amendment. High standards are associated, and I'm talking about the Act here, high standards are associated with respect to the Act and regulations of the endangered and threatened species. It would be to the benefit of all parties to discuss this with the agencies prior to approving an OP amendment. Again, this natural asset within Southampton is unique in the complexity of natural features and the ecological values and benefits to both human and fish and wildlife communities. Thus, further fragmentation and accumulative impacts to remaining significant woodlands justify further development. On page 7 of Mr. Davidson's letter, he states, the provincial policy also directs urban type development to settlement areas such as Southampton. It also promotes infilling and efficient use of services and lands. I would, however, state that infilling and development should not be directed to our remaining significant woodlands and natural heritage areas, and this council give a more higher consideration of the provincial policy statements of Mr. Davidson's letter itself, where he refers to section 211 and 212. Section 211 states natural features and areas should be protected for the long term. Section 212, the diversity and conductivity of natural features in the area and the long-term ecological function and biodiversity of natural heritage systems should be maintained, restored, or where possible improved, recognizing linkages between and among natural heritage features and areas, surface water areas, and groundwater features. I hope this advice to council is helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. The next speaker, please.
I'm sorry.
Next speaker, please.
Hello, my name is Melissa Clark. I live at 395 Huron Street South, directly across from the proposed development of the woodland. If this amendment to the official plan is allowed, all future consideration of development of the significant woodland area will only consider the planning implications on the woodland parcel itself and not of the adjoining properties and the Southampton community as a whole. The application has not considered a number of policy implications. For example, the role these lands play in the overall structure of the Southampton community. The community has been developed around these lands assuming that they would be protected. They supply an important amenity to the residents and visitors of Southampton. These lands are pedestrian interconnection through a natural setting between the center of the town of Southampton and its southern boundaries, east to the rail trail, south to the woodland trail, with access by way of Island Street, Bay Street, and South Street to the beaches. A concern with the proposal is that it equates the woodland area with the other two recognized significant woodlands in the town of Southampton. The other woodlands are removed geographically from the center of the community and do not perform the same structural function. On a provincial scale, the proposal is said to be required to meet the town's growth projections found in section 1.2 of the official plan. However, these lands were not considered required. These lands were not to meet the town's growth projections at the time the plan was approved. To the contrary, development of this woodland area was prohibited. If there is to be a change, surely it needs to be confirmed by the appropriate demographic review. Moreover, if additional land is required for residential purposes, are there other lands which are more appropriate for development? If this application is permitted, there will be no further consideration as to whether residential development is appropriate for this location. The only questions will be how much development, where, and what remedial work will be required. For practical purposes, there will not be an opportunity to argue for no development. The applicant relies largely on mapping work done on lots 1 to 6, which are all north of Bay Street or adjacent to it, as demonstrating that the environmental hazard lines can be moved considerably to allow for residential development. As far as I can tell, that work has not been made available to the public as part of the application. Moreover, no work has been done on the remaining lots 8 to 14, which includes the interior of the significant woodlands. The Council is being asked to approve this application on the speculation that it will all be the same as what apparently has been found on the other parcels. If it turns out to be different, it's too late. The residential designation will be in place. The work should be done before any consideration of amendment, not after. I am disappointed that the Conservation Authority is satisfied to accept that the additional assessment work can be done following the approval of amending the official plan rather than before. However, I would note they identify many potential limitations and concerns with respect to development in their report. Finally, the planning process is a public process, and this really comes to play with what was discussed just ahead of me, and that is that if any consideration is going to be made to redesignating this piece of land, it should be part of an overall policy plan, not done in a piecemeal amendment basis. This is too important to the town of Southampton as a whole, not just those of us who live neighboring the property. Thank you.
Next speaker, please. Sir.
I'm Charles Bailey. I live at 365 Huron Street South. At the southeast end of my lot, there is a culvert under Huron Street and a small stream that runs from the culvert to Lake Huron at the northwest end of my lot. Currently, the only flow in this stream is about 2 inches of water, and it's the runoff from Huron Street, and it dries up in the summertime. The erosion control along this stream is adequate for the current flows, but will not be adequate for increased flows and flooding. Any increased flows through the stream will also erode the beach area and devalue the properties in the area. The land east of my lot and Huron Street is a wetland. The mature trees and vegetation soak up the water and prevent runoff. If the land across from my place is developed, many mature trees will be removed to make way for houses, lawns, driveways, roads, ditches. Drainage will also be required for these new features. Both removing mature trees and drainage will increase runoff. I do not want this runoff directed to the stream that runs through my lot. Increased flows will erode the beach and decrease the value of the lots in the area. Who will pay for the enhanced erosion control that will be required? Page 4 of the amendment application proposes that the official plan be amended before a stormwater management report is issued. For a wetland, the impact study is incomplete without this report. The official plan should not be amended without a suitable drainage solution that will not jeopardize current properties. To sum up, I do not want the developer's drainage solution to be my flooding problem. Who will pay for the inevitable flooding damage? Me, Saugeen Shores taxpayers, or the development company if it is not already wound up?
Okay, are there other members of the public who would like to speak to this application? Let me just get through I'll just ask if there, one more time, if there are any members of the public who'd like to speak. The applicant would like to speak again, but I'll just ask if there's any other member of the public at this stage who'd like to speak. Okay, I don't see anybody, sir. So if you'd like to speak at this time, sure, go ahead.
Good evening, Council, and ladies and gentlemen in the audience. I'm John Morton, President of AWS Environmental Consulting. I've been in operation in Grey Bruce County for about 22 years now. Lived just outside of Owen Sound, lived here my entire life. I was formerly with the Ministry of Natural Resources in Owen Sound for about 12 years. I was a biologist, fish and wildlife technologist, implemented a lot of the environmental policies in Bruce County, worked a lot of my time at Denny's Dam in Southampton, did a lot of work on Chantry Island and a lot of the wetland evaluations throughout Grey Bruce County. Well over 600, and I think one of the highest in all the province of Ontario. I've sat on numerous committees dealing with natural heritage of wetlands and wetland protection, wildlife habitat restoration and policies dealing with natural hazard in that regard. I've been pretty experienced in environmental impact studies. I've done probably over 300 in Grey Bruce County. I think in the last 22 years, staff here, Jay can probably attest to it, that I've probably done 80 or 85% of the EISs in the town of Saugeen Shores. So I am very familiar with the lands, with the people, with the issues. Okay. That being said, it's unfortunate the process has evolved the way it has, because a lot of what I've heard tonight is a situation where the developers have been kind of pushed into an aspect of putting the cart before the horse. What's before you tonight is just dealing with the significant woodlands policy assessment. A lot of the questions that came out tonight and dealing with development and natural heritage are more associated with environmental impact studies. And as Ron stated at the beginning, that's part of the process of going through. Now, I can fully understand people's concerns that once you're down that road, you can't stop it. That's not true. You certainly, well, I'm sorry, it is. If you want, if
I understand that some folks will disagree with statements that are made, but if we could just please maintain order, I'd really appreciate it, sir.
There was comments made about the report that was submitted dealing with significant woodland study. And there was several, and I don't want to go over all of them, we'd be here all night. But there was comments dealing with the monarch butterfly. That's not my criteria or any consultant's criteria. That's the criteria that the province of Ontario has set out. The province of Ontario has stipulated that for significance determination, the woodland or that habitat has to be within 5 kilometers of Lake Ontario. That's it, plain and simple. Because they look at monarch butterflies flying north to south migration, that they need a stopover area to get over Lake Erie. So when I say no, it doesn't meet that criteria, it doesn't. I didn't establish that criteria, the province did. That does not mean that there's not monarch butterflies on the property or there's significant values associated with it. What it means is it doesn't meet the criteria that the province of Ontario has set out. Going through all that, the proposal that's before you tonight recognized, and because of this, it recognizes that the lands that are in question tonight are significant woodlands, regardless of what the policies say in the town official plan, dealing with 4 hectares or 2 hectares in size or anything else. It is significant woodland. And I reiterated that in the report because you've got fisheries habitat. You've got significant values dealing with wildlife habitat. None of that was ignored. That's in the report, and I encourage people to read the report. That's in there. All this does is reiterate into the Planning Act that it is a significant woodland, and the same considerations of policies that are elsewhere in the town of Saugeen Shores should be implemented uniformly throughout the town of Saugeen Shores. That does not mean development's going to go wild hand and clear cut. There's other processes that are in place, such as environmental impact studies are going to be required. It's going to be part of a public review process. It's got to be reviewed by other agencies and may even be reviewed by a third party. Those are all stipulations dealing with protections of wetlands, protections of watercourses and fish habitat, protection of woodland ecological functions, whether it be for nesting birds or rare, endangered, threatened species. That's what part of the EIS process is all about. We're not there yet. We are only looking at the potential if some of the lands that are on the woodlands have got any potential for development. That's what the focus is for the amendment. It was also brought forward, wait until the official plan is being updated. As I stated, I've had a lot of history with what's occurred over the past in this area. I was very involved with the 2012 significant woodland study that the town did. I was kind of the point person on pushing that forward, provided input to both the town staff and the conservation authorities and the consulting company that was hired. I did a lot of work even back in 2006 under the original official plan, which started talking about no development within woodlands greater than 4 hectares. So I've got a lot of history and a lot of background of over 20 years dealing with these things. At that time in 2011, the same comments were put forward, do it through the official plan update. Never happened. It never happened. Even the 2012 implemented the special policy area 4 and the significant woodlands review. That's all we're asking for now, is we're presenting an opportunity to look at and include these lands as part of the significant woodland review policy, and those to be incorporated. That does not push the door open for blatant, open-ended development. There's still all kinds of checks and balances that are in place that have to be followed. And that's been demonstrated already in the town of Saugeen Shores when you implemented the 2012 official plan. Subdivisions and single lot development has proceeded and gone forward with environmental impact studies, with wetlands preserved, protected. The woodland study also gives you the opportunity to identify linkages that are off-site. And EIS doesn't have that full opportunity because it only looks at 120 meters around where the development is going to occur, whether it's one lot for one house or 35 homes on 50 acres. The woodland review, and I even told this to my client, I cannot look at where his property line ends. I look at the entire woodland area. That's why what was been presented tonight deals with the property that these developers are looking at. But the review deals with probably 6 or 7 times that area of what's been shown on the slide. Those lands, I don't have permission to access. They're private property. That's why it's done from a roadside view and air photo interpretation. That's an accepted standard practice throughout Southern Ontario because of private land issues. Even with that being said, it is a significant woodland. If it come out and said it's not a significant woodland, then a lot of the concerns would be valid. You didn't look at the forest interior habitat. That's correct, because it's private property and I don't have access to it. But I can certainly look at an air photo and know that the province of Ontario has set out a guideline that forest interior habitat is 100 meters from a tree line edge. So anybody can pull up an air photo and measure that the woodlot is only 180 meters wide. So there's no way you have forest interior habitat. You'd have to have greater than 200 meters in width. So you don't need to be on site. On site deals with stuff like species at risk, a butternut tree. Those are what come forward through the environmental impact study process. It gives council, it gives Saugeen Valley Conservation Authorities the ability to review things to make sure that development proceeds in a proper and environmentally sound way. That's what's before you tonight, to allow the opportunity to look at further and potential development areas. Doesn't mean it's going to be given. It's just an opportunity to say, yes, maybe these lands could be developed. Doesn't mean it should be condominiums or townhouses. Maybe it could be one lot, two lots, I don't know. That's part of the next step phase process. Other than that, I just wanted to reiterate that there is going to be an open house. I believe it's here, Jay. Yeah, I think we're looking at, it'll be through the town minutes or something, but I think it's going to be April the 9th that we're looking at probably having an open house. We'll be here to answer any questions, to discuss. But dealing with how many homes are going to go up and where is it going to go and stuff like that, we don't know. That's further down the system. What we're looking at is the woodlands aspect of if there is potential or not. That's what's before tonight, to have uniformity within the town's official plan that everybody is dealt the same way.
We can, sir, if you
Yep.
are you complete? You finished your
Yep.
comments? Okay.
Yep. I can answer any questions if needed.
If we have another comment from the member of the public, sir, just make sure to take the mic, please. Okay.
You mentioned April the 9th. When is the decision going to be made by council with respect to this application?
There is there's no date set as of yet. What's happened, as I explained at the beginning, is we'll have this meeting tonight. Planning staff will take what we've heard here today, and then they will return at a later date yet to be set. But that's why we encourage you to put your name. That's why we encourage you to fill out your name in the forms at the back so that you can be informed of the next important dates in this process.
Great, thank you.
So, if there's no further questions or no further comments from members of the public, then I'll ask members of the committee if there's questions of clarification for the planner. Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have, my first question is for Mr. Davidson about your report. And it's really to clarify a point which has been raised by a number of members of the public about the wording in some parts of your report. In one place in your report, you state, and I quote, "At the direction of town staff, Mr. Durgan and Mr. Morganroth are proposing to change this restrictive policy as it applies to their 15 parcels of land." On page 8, you say, and I quote, "Mr. Durgan and Mr. Morganroth are following the advice of town staff by initiating their own significant woodland study and submitting an official plan amendment." And again on page 4, you say, "Town staff suggested that the owners apply for a site-specific amendment applicable to the 15 parcels in question." So the wording that you've used here basically states that town staff directed you, advised you, and suggested that your clients file this application. Did you and your clients request the meeting with town staff about this subject?
So, sorry, I don't.
Did you request the meeting with town staff? Did you and your clients initiate?
Yeah. Okay. So I was very brief history here. I was brought on after the initial discussions had been had with town staff and John Morton. When I got involved, I did contact Jay, and we talk about the approach. I guess the alternative approach is to do full-blown environmental impact studies, come to council with plans of subdivisions or whatever those environmental impact studies would have allowed for development to take place. I'm with my words here. None of that made any sense. So and you can ask Jay directly. I apologize, Jay. I'm not trying to put you on the spot here, but the conversation we had at planner to plan, Jay's planner, was do we do this official plan amendment approach at this very high level right now? And the answer we agreed upon was yes. This was the best, the smartest approach.
Okay, I've talked to Jay about it. Is it fair to say that staff presented you with several options that you could pursue legally, or presented your clients, or did they direct you to take this action?
Well, nobody put the proverbial gun to our head, so I'm not trying to put our staff on the spot here. They did not say we had to apply to amend the official plan.
Okay, I have a problem with the wording that you used in 3 spots.
There's a comment from Jay. Whatever Jay's title is, Jay.
Just to be clear, the record is we do meet with developers all the time. It's called pre-consultation. Landowners that want to do something with their land consult with staff to understand what the policies are. We said that there are 2 main things that they can do. They can wait for the town to consider this at our next OP review, and that there's no guarantee that council or the town would change its policy, but it would be there, open for discussion. And the second is you do it on your own. Hire a consultant and apply. And they chose number 2.
Okay.
Yep. I have a question for Mr. Morton. You spoke of your extensive experience conducting environmental impact studies and woodland studies. Do you have an estimate of what percentage of environmental impact studies conducted on behalf of developers show that the environmental hazard designations should be relocated in favor of residential designations?
Turn your microphone on there, Mr. Morton.
The process through the environmental impact study is to look at present planning zones, hazard land designations, and boundaries. I go out on the subject property and delineate what that hazard feature might be. It could be a steep slope, it could be a wetland, it could be a floodplain. When you deal with floodplains, sometimes engineers get involved. Those lands are delineated and then provided to the Conservation Authority. They're the ones dealing with flood-prone areas and hazard lands and so forth. They then come out on site, or if it's dealing with a wetland, it could be the Ministry of Natural Resources if it's a provincially significant wetland. They go out on site, assess what I looked at and where my boundary was, and either agree with it, modify it, or stay with the existing. I would say it's probably about 75 to 80% of the applications that I've gone forward with. The zoning dealing with hazard boundaries on specific properties are usually amended. Because a lot of the zoning lines that are in place today were done through 1978 air photo interpretation. Some of it has slowly been updated, and Saugeen Valley is going through a huge process right now of updating a lot of that. And it's not just Saugeen Valley, it's Grey Sauble, Maitland are the same thing. I've even had situations where, and some people do not believe this, but hazard lands have not gotten smaller, they've gotten larger. I've had Ministry of Natural Resources staff out on site, and I said, here's this 10-acre property, and 2 acres is identified as provincially significant wetland. I go out there through the EIS and I come back and say, no, there's 5.5 acres. I take the Ministry of Natural Resources biologist out and show it and confirm it. So it's grown. So it could go either way. That's part of the process. And there's no point in me lying and saying that it's going to be smaller when somebody that's qualified from the ministry or the Saugeen Valley can come out at any time and confirm or deny that. So it has gone, and I have been in situations where it has gone either way. Gotten smaller, gotten larger, or it could be the same size, but maybe shifted 10 meters because of mapping. And that's not uncommon. It's not uncommon. Even when you deal with property lines, I can call up the Bruce County official plan or Bruce County website, and you look at property lines, and the property line on the website goes right through the middle of somebody's house because everything has been skewed through the system. So that's where an environmental impact study comes in and fine-tunes all those aspects.
Okay. Thank you. So that answer, thanks, leads me to another question, and I guess this would be for Dan Kingsbury. And the question of when and how would the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forests get involved in a situation like this? At what point in the process would there be some kind of provincial oversight?
John Morton may be better to answer this question, but I'll give it a shot. The province would get involved when there's a provincial interest, such as a wetland, like a provincially significant wetland on the property, or species at risk are identified and found on the property. That would trigger them to come out and evaluate whatever's found on site. They've largely deferred the review of applications to other technical authorities. Our technical authority on natural heritage is the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority. They have ecologists on staff who advise us on natural heritage matters.
Is that something that the town would have to request for that to happen? They wouldn't do it on their own.
Yeah, there's different triggers depending on what it is. Again, if it's a species at risk issue, like say a butternut is found on the site, it's the responsibility of the developer to advise the ministry. And again, that would be discovered through an EIS. So essentially that's where they would get involved. It depends, I think, on the scenario involved.
Just before that, just to emphasize, Brian said, the Ministry of Natural Resources, being a former employee and work with them still a fair bit, they would not come out on site other than if there's a boundary issue dealing with a provincially significant wetland. When you're dealing with unevaluated wetlands, which are what's on the property that we're looking at tonight, the subject property, they defer, and even woodlands, wildlife habitat, all those things, they defer all those to the next tier government level, which is Bruce County, which then defers to maybe here. Ministry of Natural Resources only gets involved with on-site inspections dealing with provincially significant boundary disputes or resolutions for wetlands, ANSIs, or species at risk. It said butternut. I'm a butternut assessor for the province of Ontario. You have to go through certain certifications and certain requirements to maintain that. That means I have to maintain a certain standard that gets audited and checked. I go out and assess the butternut tree for health standards. I submit that report to the Ministry of Natural Resources. They audit that, and that's the process that goes forward.
I think the important thing to recognize is that we have in the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority really an outstanding agency that's in a position to be our reviewing eyes and ears on natural heritage, natural hazards, and so that's, I think, the provincial responsibilities have been delegated to the Conservation Authority, particularly on natural hazard, and they really are, at least in my experience, very astute and well qualified to make those assessments on our behalf. Councillor Grace.
To follow up and clarify then, I did have a conversation with Brandy Walter, who wrote the report for this, for the SVCA, and she told me that to write the report, she did a desktop review only and has not visited the site. So I'm just saying, her more in-depth review, would that take place after an OP amendment and in the course of an environmental impact study?
All I would say is based on whatever application you're receiving, I have a high degree of confidence in the Conservation Authority's opinion on these matters because, well, it's true. They're an excellent agency, and I think that's an important point to make. We've relied on them many times in the past, and they do their work well. Are there further questions? Councillor Grace? Yep.
And this would be, I guess, for Jay Posner, our town staff. So hypothetically, if the requested amendment is approved and residential lots are developed and sold, once the development takes place, what regulatory methods are in place to prevent property owners from cutting trees down on their property? Do we have a tree bylaw? And even if there's a certain amount of tree retention policy in place as a condition of development, what laws are in place to protect habitat or those trees?
So we don't have a tree bylaw, but we do use several measures to regulate tree preservation, restoration, and retention on sites. So we have a subdivision agreement as one means, which requires we can attach conditions to which require compliance with anything that the developer and the town agree on. So we do it for lot grading. Same could be done with tree retention. We have the Woodlands development that uses that approach. That's Acton, Trillium, Fenton Drive, that area of Port Elgin, where we require the developer at the building permit stage to show how their lot grading plan and tree retention plan is compliant with the approved plans before they get their building permit. And other means are, well, it could be as a condition of approval, all protected features are transferred to another authority like the Conservation Authority or the town or some conservation agency. That's another method we've used in other parts of the town.
Yeah, and these are all matters that would follow on only if we were to approve this and then those further studies were done and then that work would, and plans of subdivision or whatever were presented. So just a note to remain focused on the question at hand. But you have another comment, Councillor Grace?
Well, yes, I think I'm trying to stay focused on the matter at hand because once the development permit is given and the development is established 5 or 10 years down the road, what regulations do we have in place to make sure that those private landowners who may have now be second or third owners of that property are aware of the regulations and abide by them?
And there's other measures we have. It depends on how the conditions of approval are set out in any development. So again, I'll use that caveat that the mayor is reminding me of. But other means, other than say transfer of land ownership to other parties. So if we became the owner, then I don't think there's as much of a risk of tree destruction or woodland destruction if the authority who owned the land is not the developer. That's probably the highest level of protection that can be offered. Another, and this is one that we have less control over, but it's common throughout Ontario, is to have restrictive covenants. So those are requirements for new landowners to be made aware and are required to abide by approved plans, and they're sort of regulated by the civil courts. I don't have any experience in that, so I can't really say whether they're good tools. They exist and they're used in other areas. Maybe Amanda might have more experience in the GTA with her past, but I don't like how much, Mr. Mayor, do you want to get into that detail?
Further questions from members of the committee? The Vice Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I just want to again thank you for members of the public for showing up this evening and asking lots of questions. I'm sure it's not the last. We'll hear from residents in the community, but this is a very complex decision that is about to be made in the next month or two or three or four. And I just want to echo your comments, Mr. Mayor, that, I mean, yeah. I just wanted to echo your comments, Mr. Mayor, and I find that the Conservation Authority, I'm on the Conservation Authority board, and I find that sometimes they're an easy target for whipping boys, and this criticism out there that I want to say something about the Conservation Authority is that in my short time on the board, I find staff are professional, they're non-biased, and they're very thorough, and they'll be working on behalf of the municipality, the residents. It's a non-biased board, it's a non-biased staff, and I want to share an experience with you, and I think Mr. Putman might have been involved with this. I'm not sure, back in 2004 or 5. But, pardon me? No, that's not where I'm heading.
Let's just stay focused on the Vice Deputy Mayor's comments, please.
What I was leading to, is that when we put in the Albert Street Trail, what I was alluding to here, I think this is support of what you're trying to present tonight, Mr. Putman, is that the putting in that trail system with 2 bridges and 2 lead-ups with stone dust, wood chips, was probably the most difficult process that I went through with the Conservation Authority to get crossing a couple streams to put bridges across there. And this is an agency that I believe looks out for our better interests. I guess what I'm alluding to is that I mean, I can't crystal ball this thing, but I would dare say that a huge portion of this land will end up not being developed. And I know what you're saying tonight, Mr. Putman, that turn it down and don't have any development on the land, and I don't necessarily share that. But I do want to say that when the Conservation Authority gets involved, I dare say a huge chunk of property, will be looked at as with natural hazards, environmental hazard, fish habitat. There'll be a whole lot of things that will be reviewed that I think we'll find that I question how much is going to be developable. I guess, I guess I wanted to ask the consultant, Mr. Davidson. In the first presentation this evening, they were pretty clear in the first development what types of housing they were planning for the area. I see no mention in your report at all what you're planning, and I heard your explanation. It's too early in the process, but I kind of like to hear what you are up to.
I'm as transparent as they come. I'm a very straightforward, blunt person, much to the chagrin of my wife. This is it. They've hardly gone any. There's been the woodland study done for the whole area that's subject to this official plan amendment. There's been an environmental impact study that's been done for a small section to demonstrate that, yeah, not all the land has to be hazard. That's it. George and I have talked about, what could you possibly put on there, but it's so premature right now. I don't know.
I would like to see some inkling, but that's okay. I understand. To you, Mr. Mayor, to Amanda. Amanda, the servicing on Bay Street in particular, is that fully serviced, obviously, with water, sewer on both sides of the road? Is there servicing there?
There definitely is water. I don't know offhand if the sanitary sewer is on Bay Street or not, but we aren't looking at that depth for this application.
I think Mr. Mayor commented earlier this evening, this is no decisions are being made this evening. It's a first step, and I think the consultants and staff said a very, very long process. And so I'm certainly not only as a member of council, but as a member of the Conservation Authority Board now, protecting our wetlands and heritage lands is extremely important. I agree with that. We'll just have to see in the future whether it's one residential home comes out of it, or 2 residential homes, or 22. We don't know that today. So I'll certainly be weighing all my options when the planner comes back with a recommendation. I know he's making a lot of notes tonight, and so this is not going to be an easy process, no question about it. But we'll get there.
Further questions for clarification from members? I had a couple of interests. What kind of gets me about this one is this property, big property, about 20 acres of what looks like what is contiguous forest to this land that's not included in this application. That runs out to McNabb Street to the east, and that's a big chunk of part of this significant woodland. It's all one woodland. And that kind of leads me back to a question which was raised by one of the members of the public. I apologize, I'm not going to remember who, but about this question of the broader review, because it seems strange, or at least odd, to try to assess a significant woodland when you're only assessing half of it. And I wonder if that broader OP review, it would be more appropriate here. I guess first question maybe for the planner, ideally, would be, does that piece of contiguous forest, significant woodland, is it subject to the same rules today as the piece we're talking about tonight? In other words, is development outright prohibited on that piece of property, or is it under the same rules as the other sections referenced in Southampton?
Yeah, so to clarify, the special policy area that's proposed is just for the 15 assessment parcels. That other woodland portion of the significant woodland would be subject to the existing rules. It hasn't been evaluated in great detail, as Mr. Morgan indicated.
And so just to be clear then, as of today, that whole piece, of which is really one big significant woodland, is all no development permitted under any circumstances. No EISs would be accepted. That's all the same. There's no difference in what we're considering tonight and the piece to the east.
Yeah, that's correct.
See, and that's weird to me because it's one forest, right? So I guess so that's my one concern, and the other the other thing I'm wondering about is, so on the north end of the property that we're under consideration tonight, you'll have to forgive me, I'm just trying to scroll through maps here. The piece to the north up against Island Street is currently zoned, well, it's designated residential zone plan development. why would we have zoned to the planner? Why would we have zoned a piece of significant woodland that's where development is prohibited? Why would we have zoned that planned development and designated it residential?
That's a good question. I think I'll maybe provide a brief answer. And I think Mr. Morton wanted to clarify something with the applicability of the 4-hectare rule or policy on the existing woodland feature afterwards. The short answer is I'm not sure why those pieces were zoned as they are. It would require some sort of historical analysis, but I suspect it's because they have frontage on Island Street. And that's likely why they were zoned. They look like they're individual lots, sized to be individual lots with frontage on Island Street, and that's likely why they have.
It's a big piece of territory, though. It kind of dips. The PD zone dips way down into the property.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were talking about the residential.
Well, there's two things. I mean, I did reference two things: the residential designation and the planned development zoning. Like the zone, the PD zone dips well down from Island, more than halfway to Bay Street, right? So we zoned a big chunk of that property planned development. I just wonder if we had any understanding as to why that may have happened or when, but maybe not.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair question now that I understand it in greater detail. The underlying designation and the official plan is residential on those lands. And the zoning bylaw zones those lands as planned development. Typically, a planned development zone puts a freeze in those lands to, I guess, allow for the efficient use of those lands should they be developed at some point in the future. So, looking at the underlying designation, the principle of use through designation and the planned development zone, I suspect there is some form of development envisioned on those lands at the time of the OP review, if not for the woodlands policy that impacts the lands.
So that sort of leads me into my next question then about Special Policy Area 4 and the significant woodland study area, and the difference between those and this. Why? What is the technical difference between Special Policy Area 4 and the significant woodland study area and this that led us to apply such different standards to the two of them? And that kind of leads into this question with the zoning. I mean, the whole thing seems a little muddled, and I'd like to understand it better.
I think you deserve a more fulsome answer in the next meeting, but I'll give the short answer so that people aren't left hanging. Is that the reason that I'll answer from the north to the south? The reason the woodland study only covered Saugeen River north is because that's all we could budget and could do, and we focused our resources when the service sanitary sewer went in on understanding those ecological functions. When Special Area Policy 4 was created, it was done as a consortium of landowners, a consultant engineer, and the Conservation Authority to understand the lands west of the ridge and in the Saugeen Township, former Saugeen Township. It was developed around the time of amalgamation, so it made sense. The rest of the lands, including ones in Port Elgin, were the leftover policy, which was updated in 2012 to say no development in significant woodlands.
And in both of those cases, as I recall, and you could correct me, with regard to Special Policy Area 4 and the significant woodlands area, the municipality initiated those reviews as part of a broader review of those woodlands.
I can't say the Special Policy Area was done as a municipality-led review because it was a consortium of landowners that participated, but certainly the significant woodlands, and that the general application of the policy for the remainder lands was done by the municipality.
Okay. Okay. Well, those are my questions. I appreciate it. Yes. Vice Deputy Mayor.
To Mr. Davidson, if I could, and perhaps to the owners. Has there been any discussion at all with the Biosphere Conservancy about protecting these lands in perpetuity, whatever percentage of lands that might be? Have you had any discussion with the Biosphere Conservancy to this point?
No. But to elaborate on that, somebody said this a few minutes ago. It might have been the mayor. There's going to be a lot of land that's not going to be developed. So if we go through this process, let's pretend that this official plan amendment gets approved and that it leads to some further environmental impact studies being done, presumably by John. They're going to no doubt come out and say there's a lot of land that can't be touched. So when we design a subdivision, or maybe there's only a couple lots along a street, I don't know. I honestly don't know. But if whatever ends up with, let's call them the remnant parcels, we're not going to keep them. The approval authority being the county with the town council's arm twisting, probably, or not probably, but they should be, will say, listen, George, you're not owning those lands. You're giving them up. And that's and Councillor Mind, I think that's where you're going with this. And I would agree. I would suggest that a public authority own them. We're having this discussion regarding something else with, doesn't matter, but where we're asking, okay, we have remnant parcels in a subdivision. You're going to see one coming soon. Who wants them? That's the question that needs to be asked, not the developer. No problem handing them over to that group, the Conservation Authority, if the town wants it as a town park.
I know it's early, and I saw some heads going like this. And the Biosphere Conservancy is a wonderful, wonderful organization that have been deeded significant amount of lands, woodlands, throughout the town of Saugeen Shores. And I think any time we can put another 20 or 30 acres into the hands of the Biosphere Conservancy and protect it in perpetuity is a good thing. So I'm seeing heads, so it's good to hear.
Okay, is there any other questions from members? I don't see any. So thank you all very much for your, the public, we had the public moment, we've now done the council comments, so I'd appreciate it if we could just follow the process, but this isn't your last opportunity to be involved in the process. I'd ask you to, on your way out, to put your name on the registry out there so we can contact you in future, and we appreciate very much your time this evening. So with that, if I can make my way back to the agenda. Where's the agenda? Okay, so that takes us on to 9, adjournment. I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Move the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Schreider. All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you all very much.